We live in a world where the promise of connection has never been more accessible. In a single day, we can send dozens of messages, watch hundreds of short videos, like posts from friends, strangers, and celebrities, join groups with hundreds of people, and yet, at night, lay our heads on the pillow with the painful sensation of a silent emptiness. This contradiction has a name, and more than that, it has profound consequences. We are emotionally starving in the midst of an overabundance of stimuli. We feel surrounded but not touched, connected but not embraced. And this is one of the most invisible and insidious pains of the digital age. Human beings weren't designed just to interact. We were made to bond. True bonds aren't born from quick word exchanges or reactions to carefully filtered images. They emerge from presence, from attentive listening, from shared time, from comfortable silence, from the empathy built in the meeting of two inner worlds. When we replace these experiences with digital interactions, we create an illusion of closeness that fails to meet our deepest emotional needs. It's like drinking seawater to quench thirst. The more we consume, the more dehydrated we become. Modern loneliness is paradoxical. It doesn't happen in the absence of people, but in the excess of superficiality. It's possible to be in a group full of virtual laughter and still feel emotionally excluded. This exclusion happens because, deep down, what we seek isn't just answers, likes, or views. We want to be seen. We desperately wish for someone to notice what lies behind what we show. We want someone to see the exhaustion in our eyes, the sadness hidden between the lines, the silent cry for help behind a casual story post. But the dynamic of social media is built for the showcase, not for care, and that's where the abyss deepens. When we realize that our pain doesn't fit the feed, we start hiding it from ourselves too. And that leads to an even more painful internal disconnection. We begin to believe we have no right to suffer, that our distress is an exaggeration, that we must stay positive all the time. We start silencing legitimate emotions to fit the emotional performance standard the digital age demands. This constant emotional repression creates silent symptoms. Anxiety attacks that seem to come from nowhere, persistent insomnia, constant irritability, a sense of emptiness even after achievements, and a nameless sadness that seems to seep from within. Psychology shows us that human beings need three fundamental connections for solid mental health: connection with others, connection with ourselves, and connection with something greater, whether spiritual, philosophical, or symbolic. The digital age, when misused, weakens all three. Our connection with others becomes superficial, our connection with ourselves dissolves in constant comparison, and our connection with the transcendent is lost in chronic distraction. And when these three pillars fall apart, the mind collapses. We feel lost without knowing why, but there is a way forward, and that way begins with awareness. It begins when we recognize that the discomfort we feel is not weakness, not drama, not overreaction. It is a legitimate sign that something essential within us is crying out for attention. It is our inner world screaming for reconnection, not with the internet, but with our own soul. Realizing this is the first step to healing, we begin to listen to what our pain is trying to tell us. We start moving out of autopilot, questioning the excess, longing for real presence. And that longing, even if small, is already a light in the darkness. If you feel this way, tired, lonely, exhausted even while being online all the time, know that you are not alone. This pain you feel has a name, has a source, and most importantly, it has a way out. It can be crossed with care, with listening, with rituals of presence that reconnect you to your essence. Technology is not the enemy. The problem is the unchecked, automatic, compulsive use that replaces the essential with the immediate. When we reclaim what is essential, human touch, deep listening, fertile silence, we rediscover what it means to live with truth. We rediscover what it means to love, to feel, to belong. And that is why this video exists. To be a space where you can pause, breathe, listen, and above all, feel that you are not alone in this invisible journey. Here, there is no judgment. Here, there is listening. Here, there is you, whole, even if fragmented. And together, we begin this journey of reconnection. Every notification that pops up on your phone screen is not just a reminder, it's a chemical trigger. A small packet of dopamine is released in your brain every time you see a red heart flashing, a new message arriving, or a number increasing beside a video. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter responsible for motivation and pleasure, but it also lies at the heart of some of the most destructive addictions in human history. What was once just a tool to facilitate communication has silently become a behavioral laboratory that exploits the most primitive and sensitive parts of our neurobiology. And the price we pay for that is steep: constant anxiety, inability to focus, chronic irritability, and an emotional fatigue that no night of sleep can fix. It's important to understand that social networks, messaging apps, short videos, and even some games have been deliberately designed using behavioral engineering, based on variable reward mechanisms, the same principle used in casinos. We never know when the next like will come, the next reply, the next important message, and that uncertainty is addictive. It keeps the brain in a constant state of alertness, seeking stimuli, anticipating rewards, acting compulsively. Every time we check our phones without a clear reason, what we're really searching for isn't information, it's dopamine. The problem is that the more the brain becomes used to these artificial hits of fast pleasure, the less sensitive it becomes to natural sources of well-being like contemplation, reading, deep conversation, or even a simple sunset. Over time, the brain starts demanding increasingly intense and frequent stimulation. That's when the hyperdopamine cycle begins. We access social media out of anxiety, stay for the momentary relief, leave feeling guilty, and return with even more need. This cycle repeats dozens of times a day, silently draining our mental energy. And as a result, symptoms arise. Ones many people don't associate with technology: sudden anxiety attacks, trouble concentrating on simple tasks, loss of interest in previously enjoyable activities, a sense of dread upon waking up, and even panic episodes. We are emotionally burning out, yet we keep functioning, because the addiction is disguised as normality. After all, everyone's doing the same, right? Science has shown that this constant pattern of digital stimulation alters key areas of the brain, like the prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making, focus, and self-regulation. It also affects the amygdala, which is tied to fear and emotional responses. In other words, constant exposure to digital stimuli makes us more impulsive, more reactive, and more anxious. We lose the ability to pause, to breathe, to observe without acting. We live in a state of permanent urgency. The mind runs, but it gets nowhere. It's as if we're constantly being pushed from the inside, an unexplained restlessness, a rush without direction. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, points out that we need to re-educate our mental patterns through small conscious actions. In the case of digital addiction, this means creating in micro moments of silence, slowness, and presence, where the brain can relearn how to produce dopamine in a healthy way. Simple acts like leaving your phone out of the bedroom when sleeping, setting fixed times to check messages, or disabling irrelevant notifications are far more than practical tips. They are protective actions for your mental health in a system that profits from your exhaustion. Here, self-care is not optional, it's resistance. From a psychoanalytic perspective, we can also understand this addiction as a symbolic substitute for the absence of meaning. When we lose connection with our own story, with purpose, with real bonds, we seek external compensations to silence the inner void. The phone becomes a kind of emotional pacifier, something that soothes, distracts, numbs, but doesn't heal. And just like a child eventually has to let go of the pacifier to grow, we too must gradually let go of this illusory digital comfort and face life with emotional maturity. It's important to say this: you are not weak for feeling dependent on your phone. You are not lazy for losing focus. You are not lacking willpower for feeling anxious when trying to disconnect. All of this is part of a system that was carefully built to generate exactly that effect. This is not your fault, but the responsibility for change can now be yours. And you don't have to do this alone. This video exists to be a starting point, an anchor in the middle of the storm, an invitation to honestly examine the effects that technology has had on your mind and, from that awareness, begin to chart new paths. Mental health in the digital age begins with conscious choices and small daily victories. When you resist picking up your phone for no reason, you're training your brain to trust itself again. When you trade 10 minutes of screen time for 10 minutes of silence, you're teaching your mind how to come home. When you slow down, the world may keep spinning, but you finally find yourself again. We live in a showcase, a display window of smiling faces, sculpted bodies, daily achievements, perfectly served coffees, and dream vacations. A window that rarely reveals what's behind the lens, the pain, the doubt, the exhaustion, the imperfection. In the midst of this artificially lit scenery, we begin to see ourselves as unfinished products, versions that are never good enough. And so, the construction of our self-image, something that should be an internal, emotional, intimate process, starts to be shaped by external filters, digital metrics, and others' approval. The result? A distorted, fragmented identity that grows increasingly distant from the essential truth of who we are. From an early age, we are conditioned to seek recognition. That's human. It's part of our psychological structure. But the problem begins when that recognition becomes entirely dependent on factors outside of ourselves. Social media amplifies this dependency by turning our value into numbers: likes, followers, comments, views. When we tie our self-worth to these volatile metrics, we place our emotional well-being in the hands of a system that was never meant to embrace us, but to keep us hooked, comparing and consuming. According to psychological studies, social comparison is one of the greatest sources of emotional suffering in the digital age, and it usually happens between our backstage and someone else's highlight reel. We compare our ordinary days with others' carefully edited best moments. We compare our real bodies with filtered and retouched images. We compare our quiet achievements with loud declarations of success. This slowly erodes our sense of self-worth, feeding a constant feeling of inadequacy. And worse, we start treating ourselves like flawed projects to be fixed, instead of human beings to be embraced. Psychoanalysis teaches us that identity is shaped through the gaze of the other, but that other must be real, present, and emotionally engaged. When the mirror of our identity becomes a smartphone, a soulless mirror that reflects the ideal, not the real, we enter a crisis of emotional identity. The question, "Who am I?" turns into, "Who do they want me to be?" And in the quest for digital acceptance, we lose touch with our inner truth. We begin crafting personas to please invisible audiences, and the more we invest in these personas, the more afraid we become of showing who we truly are. This generates a cruel side effect: the shame of simply existing, the shame of a body that doesn't fit the mold, a life without glamour, a sadness that doesn't attract likes. And that shame silences us. It makes us mute legitimate pain, hide our vulnerabilities, force smiles. This emotional silencing leads to serious symptoms: anxiety attacks, depression, a sense of not belonging, deep, low self-esteem. We begin to believe there's something wrong with us, when in truth, the flaw lies in the mirror we've been looking into. Cognitive behavioral therapy works to restructure dysfunctional beliefs born from these comparisons. One of the main ones is the belief that I'll only be loved if I'm perfect. This belief, reinforced by social media, must be challenged through real-life experiences of acceptance, of authentic connection, of shared humanity. We must remember that life's beauty lies in its imperfections. No one wakes up with flawless skin. Sad days are part of life too. Being real is far more healing than being admired. The path to rebuilding a healthy self-image involves practices of inner reconnection, reducing exposure to content that triggers toxic comparison, following people who promote authenticity and vulnerability, engaging in self-knowledge with deep questions. What do I truly enjoy? What values drive my life? Who am I when no one is watching? And above all, practicing self-compassion, treating yourself with kindness, allowing yourself to be human, celebrating small victories, embracing cloudy days with the same care you give sunny ones. Spirituality can also be a powerful ally in this process. Whether through meditation, nature contemplation, prayer, or connection with something greater, rediscovering the sacred within is an antidote to the illusion of the digital persona. Because in the soul's silence, there is no need to perform. There is only presence, and it is in presence that healing lives. If today you feel disconnected from yourself, trying to fit into a mold that wasn't made for your soul, take a deep breath. You are not alone. The journey back home is possible. And it begins with one simple gesture. Stop comparing and start listening to yourself. Life is not a showcase. Life is a process. and you are worthy of love in every one of your phases. There is a silent, almost invisible feeling that has been eroding the self-esteem of millions of people in this age of constant exposure. The fear of being behind in life. A fear not based on facts, but on distorted perceptions. A fear fueled day after day by the images we see, the accomplishments we read about, the stories we hear. As we scroll through social media, we are bombarded with tales of early success, transformed bodies, perfect marriages, meteoric careers, and we start to wonder, and me, where did I go wrong? This doubt does not arise from truth, but from comparison. And when comparison becomes chronic, it ceases to be a stimulus and becomes a disease of the soul. Cognitive psychology shows us that the human brain has a natural tendency to assess its position based on its environment. That's part of our social biology. The problem is, in the digital universe, that environment has been completely distorted. What we see on social media is not a balanced sample of real life. It's a curated selection of peak moments, major achievements, and idealized versions. Comparing yourself to that unreal standard is like running a marathon against holograms. You will always feel behind, even when you're moving forward. The fear of falling behind, also known as FOBO, fear of being outpaced, is one of the most common manifestations of modern anxiety. It sneaks into our most intimate decisions. It makes us doubt our steps, question our choices, and mistrust our pace. It's as if there were an invisible race everyone is running, but no one really knows where the finish line is. And in the panic of not being last, we trample over our own processes, sabotage our health, sacrifice rest, and distance ourselves from what actually nourishes us. Psychoanalysis understands this phenomenon as a conflict between the ideal ego and the real ego. The ideal ego is that perfect image we create of ourselves, what we think we should be. And the further that image is from reality, the more guilt, shame, and frustration we feel. Social media constantly reinforces this unattainable ideal, making our ordinary lives, with their pauses, mistakes, delays, and restarts, seem insufficient. But the truth is that every human process happens in stages, and each person has their own timing. The rush of the world cannot outweigh the wisdom of your body, your mind, and your story. Cognitive behavioral therapy proposes that we identify and challenge automatic negative thoughts related to comparison. For example, when you think at this age, I should have achieved more, it's important to ask, who defined that deadline? Does this thought help or paralyze me? What's my definition of success? Questioning these mental scripts is essential for reclaiming ownership of your own narrative. Because life isn't a straight line, it's a field of experiences unfolding at unique rhythms, and you are not behind. You are on your path. From a therapeutic perspective, it is essential to cultivate a process-oriented mindset. Instead of a comparison mindset, this means valuing each step no matter how small. It means celebrating invisible progress, like keeping a routine, facing a fear, saying no for the first time, or asking for help. Every small victory is an internal milestone of maturity. And when you begin to recognize your own progress, comparison loses power, because you stop measuring your life with someone else's ruler and begin to follow your own compass. Spirituality can offer even deeper meaning to this process. In many traditions, time is not a line but a cycle. There's a time to plant, a time to harvest, a time to be still, a time to act. And maybe you're in the waiting season, the one where roots grow even if nothing appears above the surface. The flower doesn't bloom out of urgency. It blooms when its time has come. And the same is true for you. If today you feel like you're falling behind, like you haven't found yourself, like you're behind compared to others, take a deep breath. That feeling is common, but it doesn't have to be permanent. It's not a fact, it's a symptom. And like any symptom, it can be treated. With listening, with time, with presence, and with the reminder that comparison is the thief of joy. Every time you compare yourself, you drift further from who you are. And every time you reconnect with your truth, you take a step toward emotional freedom. You are not behind, you are alive. And being alive is already a miracle in motion. Life doesn't require speed, it requires presence. And in this session, that's exactly what we're relearning. To be here, now, with everything we are. There is a kind of tiredness that no amount of sleep can fix, a deeper kind of exhaustion that lingers even after days off, even when everything seems calm on the outside. It is the fatigue of someone who never truly disconnects, who lives with a mind permanently occupied, a heart always on alert, a soul constantly indebted to its own time. We live in an era where silence has been hijacked, and with it, we have lost one of the greatest tools for healing and reconnection in human existence: inner listening. The digital world has imposed a frantic pace on our perception. At any moment we can consume news, videos, opinions, music, memes, ideas, ads, and conversations. Something is always calling for our attention, but attention is a finite resource, and when it is consumed by everything, there is none left for what matters most: ourselves. Without silence, without pause, without emptiness, there is no room for our inner truth to emerge, and that is exactly what is silently making us sick. We no longer know how to be alone. We no longer know how to be with ourselves. Humanistic psychology, especially in the works of Carl Rogers, reminds us that listening is the starting point for all transformation, but not just listening to others, listening to ourselves. That deep listening that happens in stillness, when we allow thoughts to surface without rush, when emotions are given names, when dormant memories arise to be understood. This silence is not empty, it is fertile. It is the soil from which the answers we search for externally can grow. But how can we find them if we never stop to listen? Hyperconnection has fragmented our psychic time. Every notification pulls us away from ourselves. Every feed update interrupts the natural flow of consciousness. The mind begins to operate in short bursts, jumping from stimulus to stimulus, lacking depth and continuity. This creates a chronic internal state of dispersion, which directly affects our ability for introspection, meditation, and self-reflection. And without those moments of meeting ourselves, we become strangers within our own soul. Inner silence is also the space where emotions reorganize themselves. It is where we digest lived experiences, process trauma, grieve losses, and make clear decisions. When we are always busy, distracted, reacting, our emotional system collapses. We store too much, we process too little, and over time, this spills into anxiety attacks, feelings of emptiness, sleep disturbances, emotional outbursts, or an undefinable sadness that follows us for no clear reason. Cognitive behavioral therapy proposes that mindfulness be reclaimed as a therapeutic tool for reconnection. The practice of conscious silence, even just a few minutes a day, has a profound impact on brain chemistry. It reduces cortisol levels, the stress hormone, activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which promotes calm, and stimulates areas of the brain related to compassion, empathy, and decision-making. Silence, then, is a remedy. A remedy that doesn't come in capsules but in pauses, and it's not just about being away from your phone. It's about being fully present with yourself, sitting without hurry, turning everything off, observing your breath, looking inward with curiosity, not judgment, accepting the thoughts that arise without fighting them, crying if needed, laughing alone, remembering things long forgotten, forgiving yourself, listening to the inner child that is often crying for a hug it never received. Spirituality also invites us into silence as a path of reunion. Nearly all of the world's spiritual traditions have in common the value of pause, retreat, and solitude. It is in silence that the sacred is heard. It is in silence that we recognize our own light and also our own shadow. Because silence is not comfortable, it is deep, it is a return, a dive, and that is why it is so transformative. If you feel like you are always tired, always busy, always anxious, maybe what you're missing is not more time or more productivity. Maybe what's missing is less noise, less stimulation, less rushing, and more presence, more listening, more stillness, more you with you. You don't have to disconnect from the world, but you can reconnect with yourself. And that begins with a simple gesture, creating pockets of silence in your day, opening space to breathe, allowing yourself not to respond right away, turning off the screen, closing your eyes, listening to what's alive inside you. Because often, what you're looking for out there is just waiting for a bit of silence to be revealed. Have you ever found yourself scrolling through your phone for minutes or even hours without really knowing what you were looking for? Have you ever ended a day with the impression that you lived more through the screen than in the real world, yet still went to bed with an unexplainable emptiness. This phenomenon has become increasingly common. The infinite scroll, that automatic gesture of swiping the screen in search of something we can't even name, is one of the most silent and dangerous symptoms of our era. It doesn't just consume our time, it numbs our emotions, anesthetizes our senses, and disconnects us from the most basic human experience, feeling. The logic behind infinite scroll is simple: there is no end, and the brain, conditioned to seek closure, enters a loop. Each new piece of content seems to promise an answer, a better distraction, a more interesting video, a funnier meme. But what's really behind this constant search isn't entertainment. It's escape. We're running from the anxiety we can't name, from the boredom that reveals how disconnected we are from our essence, from the sadness that surfaces when the house is quiet. We run from the questions we don't want to ask ourselves, from a loneliness that deep down isn't about lacking people, it's about lacking ourselves. Neuroscience explains that this constant craving for novelty activates the dopaminergic system, the same one triggered by addictions to gambling, overeating, and even certain substances. In other words, each new video, image, or story has the potential to create a small pleasure spike. But those spikes aren't sustainable. They fall quickly, and the brain, conditioned, starts looking for the next one. Thus, we form a cycle of emotional consumption that slowly numbs our ability to feel real pleasure, to endure creative boredom, and to handle the discomfort necessary for growth. The most dangerous part of this cycle is that it doesn't seem like a problem at first glance. After all, we're just passing the time, relaxing, watching funny stuff. But behind that apparent innocence, we're losing touch with real life. We stop noticing the taste of food, the texture of the wind, the eyes of those around us, the thoughts that might bring us insight. We stop living, because when we numb the pain, we also numb joy, creativity, intuition. We enter a kind of existential numbness. Psychology calls this experiential avoidance, the attempt to avoid negative emotions at all costs, even if it disconnects us from our own existence. The problem is that by avoiding feeling, we pay the price of losing meaning. We become emotionally dulled, as if something's missing even when everything seems fine. That's why so many people live with a constant sense of emptiness, despite having a routine full of stimuli. It's not a lack of activity that's killing our soul. It's the excess of meaningless noise that prevents us from hearing what matters. Acceptance and commitment. Therapy, ACT, one of the most modern approaches in psychology, offers a different path, not to flee discomfort, but to accept it as part of the human experience. Instead of scrolling away from the anguish, we can start observing it, naming it, sitting with it for a few minutes. It might feel scary at first, but it's deeply liberating, because every emotion wants to be heard, and once it's heard, it transforms. What once seemed like a bottomless pit reveals itself as a call. Hey, look at me, I'm part of you. Practical strategies to break the cycle of emotional numbness include setting specific times to use your phone, taking mindful breaks every hour to breathe deeply, practicing conscious scrolling, observing what you're consuming and asking if it truly nourishes your soul. Another powerful practice is the emotional digital fast, reserving parts of your day or entire days to stay away from social media and instead get closer to yourself. Write, walk, draw, listen to music with your eyes closed, look at the sky. It's not nostalgia, it's emotional survival. Spirituality can also be a powerful ally in reclaiming presence. Silent meditations, simple prayers, solitary contemplation, all of these restore texture to the experience of living. They remind the body that it exists. They remind the soul that it feels. They remind the heart that it beats. They remind the mind that it can rest. And over time, we begin to shift from consumption mode to connection mode, with the world, with others, with ourselves. If today you feel numb, like you no longer feel with the same intensity as before, like everything is just a string of tasks and distractions, know this: there is a way back. And it starts with the brave decision to stop scrolling life away, to pause, breathe, feel, and listen to what silence has to say. Because deep down, what you've been endlessly searching for on the screen might just be waiting for you to meet yourself again. A new silent epidemic is spreading across the world, And it doesn't show up as a fever, but as exhaustion, a tiredness that doesn't go away with rest, a mind that keeps running even when the body has stopped. A state of constant overload, where even simple tasks feel like mountains. This is a digital burnout. Emotional, mental, and physical exhaustion caused by an excess of technological stimuli, fragmented information, and endless online interactions. A collapse of the internal regulation system brought on by a world that never pauses, never quiets down, never lets the soul breathe. Burnout, traditionally associated with the workplace, has taken on new dimensions in the digital age. It's no longer just about professional pressure, but about the accumulation of all the micro-tensions throughout the day. Urgent notifications, pending emails, simultaneous chats, virtual meetings, videos demanding attention, content asking for opinions, algorithms demanding our presence. Everything demands something, and we, often without realizing it, live in a state of constant demand. The human mind was not designed to process this much information at once. Every new tab, every chat window, every video in the feed is a task that our working memory has to hold, even if only for seconds. Over time, this fragmented load overwhelms the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making, focus, and self-control. When that system burns out, we start experiencing irritability, memory lapses, mental confusion, insomnia, and even depersonalization. That eerie sensation of not being fully present in oneself. But perhaps the most alarming symptom of digital burnout is the loss of pleasure. Things that once brought us joy now feel like burdens. Replying to messages feels draining. Watching something interesting feels exhausting. Reading, walking, talking, everything feels like too much. And that's when we realize it's not the body that's tired. It's the mind that has collapsed. It's the soul that cried for help and wasn't heard. Because we often confuse productivity with presence. And in the name of productivity, we sacrifice bodily awareness, emotional pauses, and psychic recovery space. Work psychology and emotional neuroscience show us that true rest isn't just the absence of tasks, but the presence of regeneration. That includes silence, nature, deep breathing, human connection without pressure, spontaneous laughter, art, spirituality. Real rest is affective and sensory. And digital burnout, precisely because it affects these domains, calls for a deeper kind of healing. Reconnection with what has no screen. Cognitive behavioral therapy recommends a restorative self-care plan that includes identifying digital overload triggers, setting clear boundaries, such as maximum screen time or screen-free zones, and most importantly, replacing stimulation with presence. For example, instead of watching 3 videos in a row, go for a walk without your phone. Instead of replying to every message immediately, allow yourself to wait, to breathe, to take care of yourself before taking care of the world. Psychoanalysis also contributes by identifying the digital superego, an inner voice that demands we be constantly available, productive, and up to date. This superego is reinforced by social media metrics, the hustle culture, and the guilt of not producing all the time. Silencing that voice is often the first step toward healing, because no one can flourish in an environment that only demands but never nurtures. And that's what we must create, an inner space of compassion. Spirituality can be a powerful ally in recovering from digital burnout. The simple act of stopping, closing your eyes, and breathing mindfully is in itself a prayer of the body. Walking in silence without headphones can be a meditation in motion. Looking at the sky for 5 minutes can be a reunion with the sacred. And through these small rituals, something begins to shift. The mind slows down, the heart softens, the soul returns home. If today everything feels like too much, if nothing brings you joy, if waking up already feels exhausting, hear this as a call. You're not weak, you're exhausted. And exhaustion is not fixed with willpower, but with kindness, with pause, with boundaries, with reconnection. Digital burnout is a symptom of disconnection from ourselves. And the way back begins with the decision to prioritize what's essential: your mental health, your silence, your real life. Inside every adult, there still lives a child who once looked at the world with wonder, felt afraid of the dark, longed to be loved, cried alone in the room, smiled at simple gestures. That inner child does not disappear with time. It becomes an essential part of our emotional structure. When it is heard, cared for, and respected, we become healthier, more empathetic, more balanced adults. But when that child is ignored, wounded, or overwhelmed by stimuli, it cannot understand. It suffers in silence. And in the digital age, that silence has become a muffled scream in millions of hearts. Childhood is the time when the foundations of identity, affection, emotional regulation, and psychological safety are formed. It is a period of slow discoveries, deep bonds, parental presence, connection with nature, and the unfiltered exploration of the body and emotions. But digitalized childhood is, in many cases, replacing these foundational experiences with flashing screens, stimulating sounds, and videos that jump from one to another without pause. The result is a generation growing up with a deficit of presence and an excess of distraction. A generation that learns to calm down with videos, to escape boredom with games, to avoid pain with digital dopamine. But what is not lived through the body, the emotion, the gaze of another, does not consolidate as real learning. Child neuroscience shows us that brain development requires concrete experiences: touching, running, getting dirty, waiting, feeling frustrated, engaging face-to-face. When screens are consumed in excess during early childhood, they can delay the development of language, empathy, frustration, tolerance, and emotional self-regulation. And that carries into adulthood. People who feel impatient without reason, who have emotional outbursts over small conflicts, who struggle to focus, to build deep bonds, or who constantly seek external distractions to avoid inner silence. These are often adults with an inner child who never had the time to mature safely. Developmental psychology explains that children need clear boundaries, genuine attention, and space to express themselves emotionally. But in the rush of modern life, many parents, exhausted, overwhelmed, and themselves dopamine-dependent, end up outsourcing emotional care to technology. Tablets become babysitters, videos become comfort, games replace conversation, and the child, though quiet, feels it, feels the absence of the gaze, the touch, the shared time, grows up physically present but emotionally unattended. And this lack of affection, even when subtle, becomes symptoms: isolation, early anxiety, fear of failure, extreme need for approval, anger outbursts, difficulty with self-control. These wounds from digitalized childhood do not disappear on their own. They stay with us into adulthood, influencing our relationships, our self-esteem, our way of responding to life's challenges. The inner child, when not nurtured, becomes an adult who asks for help in silence, who feels small in the face of adversity, who avoids conflict out of fear of rejection, who doesn't trust their own worth, who searches for digital likes to fill the void of real-life love never received. The good news is that this child can still be heard, and that listening begins with a gesture of self-love. To pause, look inward, and gently ask, "What are you feeling inside me?" Often the answer comes as an emotion, a sadness you never understood, a fear that seemed exaggerated, a nameless emptiness. Sometimes it comes as a memory, a time you needed presence but got a screen, a day you wanted a hug and received silence, a whole year where you just wanted to be seen and weren't. Therapy, whether psychoanalytic, cognitive behavioral, systemic, or integrative, can become the space where that child exists again, where it learns to speak, where you, now an adult, can finally offer what was missing: care, patience, validation. Because even if your parents didn't know how, even if the world moved too fast, now you can be the adult your inner child needed. Spiritually, many traditions speak of the healing of the inner boy or girl as an essential step toward wholeness, and it's no coincidence. The inner child is the keeper of our ability to love without conditions, to be enchanted by the simple, to trust without fear. To heal that part of us is to restore the soul's sensitivity, and this is only possible with time, with listening, with affection, everything that the digital age, in its haste, often tries to erase. If today you feel you react too intensely, feel insecure without knowing why, or seek relief in screens only to find more exhaustion, perhaps it's your inner child asking for space. And this video, this session can be a beginning of reconnection, healing, and presence. Because no matter how loudly the world shouts out there, the voice that matters most is the one you hear when you become still inside. And that voice, almost always, is the voice of a child who just wants to be loved. In a world where almost everything is measured in clicks, likes, and views, new ways of existing have emerged, or rather, of presenting ourselves. We create profiles, shape personas, edit versions of ourselves that are more attractive, more performative, more accepted. And little by little, without realizing it, we begin to invest more energy in maintaining these digital masks than in listening to our inner truths. Living to please algorithms is a subtle prison. There are no bars, no guards, but there are invisible rules that regulate our behavior, our mood, and even our self-esteem. And the most dangerous part, we start to believe that the character we created is actually who we are. Modern social psychology calls this identity performance fatigue, the psychological exhaustion caused by the constant maintenance of an idealized image. Every time we post something with fear of not being liked, or refrain from expressing an opinion to avoid cancellation, or force a smile when we're feeling low, we reinforce this cycle. And over time, what was supposed to be a tool for connection becomes a showcase where we put ourselves up for sale. We begin living to be seen, not to be felt. And this trade, visibility for emotional depth, costs us our authenticity. Psychoanalysis interprets this phenomenon as an intensification of the engage of the other. Jacques Lacan said that the subject is deeply shaped by the desire of the other, and in the age of social media, this other is no longer one person, but a silent, anonymous crowd that expresses itself in numbers, emojis, and metrics. We live under the constant evaluation of an invisible audience. This triggers mechanisms of anxiety, hyper self-criticism, fear of rejection, and paradoxically, a deep sense of emptiness. Because even when we're accepted, we don't feel it was for who we truly are, but for a carefully constructed mask. Behind this dynamic hides a quiet pain that many carry, the feeling of always performing to be interesting, to appear happy, to have a successful life. This constant performance disconnects us from who we really are. There's no room left for spontaneity, for mistakes, for silence. Every moment becomes content, every emotion becomes editable, every day becomes a metric, and the heart, lost in all of this, cries out for freedom. Cognitive behavioral therapy works to rebuild self-esteem based on internal values, not external validation. One of the central steps in this process is asking, what truly matters to me, regardless of what others think? When we begin acting in alignment with our values, not others' expectations, life begins to align. Anxiety fades, joy returns, and maybe for the first time in a long time, we feel like we are living a life that is actually ours, not just a public performance carefully scripted. There is also a fundamental spiritual point here. Contemplative traditions have always warned about the dangers of inflated ego, the need for approval, the desire to please, and the solution has always been the same: turn inward. Rediscover silence. Find worth in the invisible. Know that you are worthy even when you're not shining for anyone. The soul doesn't need followers, it needs truth, and truth only grows where there's courage to take off the mask and meet your own vulnerability face to face. If today you feel lost from yourself, unsure of what is spontaneous and what is strategic, if you're tired of performing, pleasing, maintaining a standard, breathe deeply. You can return. You can simply be. You can begin to rebuild a relationship with your essence, and that doesn't require exposure or perfection. It only requires one internal gesture of reconciliation: self-acceptance. Accepting yourself as real, accepting yourself as human, accepting yourself as imperfect. Because your beauty does not lie in the number of likes. It lies in the courage to be yourself even when no one is watching. The algorithm may reward you with numbers, but real life, the one pulsing inside you, only blossoms with truth, presence, and emotional freedom. And that's what we're cultivating here, a space where you don't have to perform. You just have to exist. We live in the age of instant messages, video calls, and real-time stories. We can talk to someone on the other side of the world in seconds. We can follow the daily lives of dozens of people without leaving the couch. And yet, it's never been more common to hear phrases like, "We're together, but feel distant. We talk all the time, but don't really listen to each other. We're in the same room, but each on our own screen. Hyperconnectivity, contrary to its promise, has not strengthened emotional bonds. It has saturated, distorted, and dried them out. And this has affected couples, families, friendships, and most of all, the most essential bond, the one we have with ourselves. Relationship psychology teaches us that human emotional bonds are built on three pillars: presence, listening, and vulnerability. And none of these three are compatible with haste, distraction, or automatic responses. Technology has brought us closer geographically, but has distanced us emotionally. Often we spend more time looking at our partner's screen than into their eyes. We reply with emojis, but leave important words unsaid. We share what we eat, but not what we feel. We exchange stickers, but not silences. And so relationships become functional, but empty. The digital age has also amplified a dangerous form of emotional comparison. We see couples making public declarations of love, seemingly perfect families at happy dinners, inseparable friends on cinematic trips. And we start to wonder, why isn't my relationship like that? The problem is that what we see online is not love, it's editing, it's emotional aesthetics, it's effective marketing. But when we take that as our reference, we begin judging our real relationships, those with conflict, silence, boredom, flaws, as not good enough. And without realizing it, we start chasing an ideal that never existed, a love that survives only on screens, not in the soul. Another subtle and devastating effect of hyperconnectivity in relationships is the loss of longing. The time apart, so essential for desire, emotional processing, and the building of true presence, has been replaced by constant availability. We are always accessible. We reply instantly. We share everything in real time. And with that, the mystery, the space, the waiting, key elements of intimacy have been erased. And when someone is always virtually present, they stop being a surprise, something to look forward to, someone to reunite with. We become spectators of the other's life, but no longer protagonists of the same scenes. Couples therapy, especially through the systemic approach, shows us that the main source of crisis is not conflict. It is emotional invisibility, feeling alone within a relationship, feeling like the other hears, but doesn't truly listen, sees, but doesn't really see, is there but not fully present. And in times of hyperconnection, this invisibility grows, because physical presence does not guarantee emotional connection. And the constant exchange of messages doesn't replace the depth of a face-to-face conversation, with no distractions, no notifications, no filters. From a spiritual perspective, true love is not sustained by words or gestures alone. It is born in the depth of presence. Being with someone in silence, hearing their breath, sensing their emotional state, feeling the energy of the moment, all of that requires time, surrender, and vulnerability. And technology, when used unconsciously, interrupts this flow. It places us in the relationship but not in the moment. And love does not live in the past nor in the feed. It lives in the now, in attentive listening, in an undistracted touch, in a gaze that lingers. Cognitive behavioral therapy offers paths to restoring connection in emotional bonds. One of them is to create rituals of presence, moments with no screens, no phones, where all attention is directed to the other. Silent dinners, walks without notifications, long conversations with no interruptions, simple acts but deeply restorative. Another crucial point is reclaiming honest communication, saying what we feel, what we need, what we fear, even if we're afraid of the reaction. Because there is no intimacy without truth. If today you feel your relationship is distant, that your connections are fragile, that intimacy has been replaced by routine, know this: there is still time. Time to relearn, time to reconnect, time to look at each other with new eyes, and most importantly, time to reconnect with yourself, because no relationship will be deep if you are absent from yourself. Love needs space, it needs pause, it needs presence. And perhaps the greatest act of love you can do today, for yourself, for someone else, for a relationship, is to turn off the world for a few minutes and simply be. Be whole, be true, be available in body, soul, and silence. There is a topic that few have the courage to talk about, but which silently affects the mental and emotional health of millions of people. How pornography, amplified by the internet, is shaping sexuality, relationships, and the perception of intimacy in the digital age. What once required effort and shame to access is now just one click away. Free, endless, anonymous. But what seems like simple entertainment hides a deep impact: emotional isolation and the impoverishment of real erotic experience. And the less we talk about it, the farther we drift from understanding and healing. Sexuality is one of the most intimate and powerful expressions of the human being. It involves not only the body but also affection, gaze, energetic exchange, real touch, shared time, listening to the other, connection. But in the logic of digital pornography, sexuality is reduced to the visual, to performance, to the rapid consumption of stereotyped and often dehumanized images. There is no room for emotional connection, for vulnerability, for reciprocity. And the brain, when repeatedly exposed to this type of content, begins to associate pleasure with solitude, arousal with screens, and desire with the absence of another. Neuroscience explains that frequent pornography consumption alters the brain's reward circuits, especially those related to dopamine. The more visual stimulation, the more tolerance the brain develops. This means what once excited no longer suffices after a while. Desensitization arises, along with the search for increasingly extreme content, and in many cases, difficulty becoming aroused by reality. This has a name: porn-induced sexual dysfunction, a real and growing phenomenon that affects the ability to relate in a spontaneous, healthy, and intimate way with another person. Clinical psychology has observed a significant rise in anxiety, depression, social withdrawal, and emotional inadequacy in people who consume excessive pornography. Many report difficulty connecting emotionally with real-life partners, avoid in-person relationships out of fear of comparison or frustration, and in more severe cases, develop emotional attachments to the pornographic universe as a way to compensate for unresolved traumas, deep emotional voids, or unconscious fears of rejection. It's as if pornography offers a false sense of control over desire, but at the cost of true intimacy. From a psychoanalytic point of view, excessive pornography use can be understood as a narcissistic defense against otherness, a way to avoid real encounters with another person, with their differences, complexities, and emotions. In the pornographic world, the other is just an object. In real life, the other is a subject with their own desires, boundaries, feelings, and history. And it is precisely this unpredictability that makes real love so difficult and so valuable. To flee from that is to flee from the most profound human experience. But the good news is, reconnection is possible. Therapy, especially integrative approaches, can help explore the emotional roots of compulsive consumption, restore the connection with one's own body, and work on limiting beliefs about pleasure, affection, and the worthiness of love. Many patients throughout the therapeutic process report not only improvement in relationships, but also a radical transformation in how they feel, touch, and allow themselves to be touched, physically and emotionally. Spiritually, sexuality is seen in many traditions as a sacred creative force, a language of the soul through the body. But for it to be fully lived, it must move away from the logic of consumption and return to the logic of encounter. Encounter with the other. Encounter with oneself. Encounter with the sacred that lives in each act of surrender. There is no true pleasure where there is haste, guilt, or escape. True pleasure is the one that integrates body, mind, heart, and soul into a single, living moment of presence. If you feel you've lost connection with your sexuality, if you're trapped in habits that don't nourish you, if you feel guilt or emptiness after pleasure, know this: you're not alone. And this doesn't define who you are. This is a signal, a call for attention, a wound asking for care, not judgment. The way back is not through repression, but through listening, through understanding, through the emotional rebuilding of the erotic experience. You deserve to feel pleasure with freedom, with presence, with truth, and above all with love, starting with love for yourself. There is a subtle kind of disappearance happening every day. We don't notice it, but it repeats itself like a habit, like a conditioned reflex. We are here, but not whole. The mind wanders, focus slips away, presence dissolves. We answer messages while someone is speaking to us, open dozens of tabs while trying to finish a task, scroll through our feed while we eat. The body is present, but consciousness is scattered. The result is deeper than it seems. We are losing ourselves, living as if we're in a state of emotional autopilot, with no time to feel, no space to think, no silence to simply be. Cognitive neuroscience has already proven that digital multitasking overload fragments the brain's sustained attention circuits. The mind, exposed to constant and simultaneous stimuli, loses its natural ability for deep focus, the kind of attention that connects us to the present experience, that allows us to dive into a conversation, to fully enjoy a song, or savor a meal with total presence. Attention becomes a restless butterfly hopping from flower to flower, never landing on any. And this leads not only to lower productivity, but also to a subtle anguish, a feeling of always leaving something unfinished, including yourself. Psychology calls this chronic attentional fatigue. It manifests through symptoms such as difficulty concentrating, irritability without clear cause, constant dissatisfaction, memory lapses, and even depersonalization, that sense of being distant from oneself. And the more we live in this state of constant distraction, the harder it becomes to access deep emotions, reflect clearly, or make decisions aligned with our true values. A distracted mind is also a mind disconnected from its emotional core. From a therapeutic perspective, this condition requires a re-education of focus. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, proposes mindfulness downward practices as a way to retrain the mind to inhabit the present. This doesn't mean becoming a monk or meditating all day. It means, for example, taking a shower while paying attention to the water, eating while noticing the flavors, talking to someone while looking them in the eye, working on one task at a time. These are small gestures, but they return texture to time, presence to the moment, and, perhaps most importantly, meaning to life. Psychoanalysis also offers a powerful reading of this phenomenon. Constant distraction is often an unconscious form of escape. We run from pain we don't know how to name. We run from the questions we've avoided for years. We run from a dissatisfaction that hides behind the rush. And distraction becomes a refuge, a place where we don't have to face ourselves. But every refuge, when it turns into a prison, demands an exit. And the exit begins with the courage to stop. Stop running. Stop escaping. Stop ignoring yourself. Spirituality has also spoken about this for millennia. Contemplative practices such as prayer, meditation, and sacred silence have always been ways to gather the soul's scattered fragments. The present, this exact moment, is the only place where life truly happens. And no matter how much the mind tries to pull us away, the heart can only be heard here, in the now, where the breath is, where the body is, where the truth is. If you feel that you're always rushed, always distracted, always split between 1,000 tasks and still not whole, breathe. Not as an automatic gesture, but as an invitation. Inhale slowly. Feel the air enter. Exhale deeply. Notice that you are here, and that is already a beginning, a new beginning, the reclaiming of the now. Because attention is the new form of affection, and giving attention to yourself is a profound act of self-love. You deserve to be present in your own life. And the world, and the real world, the one that pulses beyond the screen, is waiting for you to return. Have you ever laid down at night exhausted, wanting nothing more than to sleep, but your mind refused to slow down? Have you felt your body tired, your eyes heavy, yet your thoughts remained lit like a lamp no one could turn off? This is one of the most common symptoms of the digital age, insomnia caused by constant overstimulation. And it rarely comes alone. It walks hand in hand with trouble concentrating, forgetting simple tasks, and feeling mentally overwhelmed. All of this has a neuroscientific explanation. The human brain was designed for cycles, for pauses, for rhythms, not for relentless stimulation. The blue light from screens, the speed of short videos, the endless notifications, the fragmented conversations, all of this creates a condition called cerebral hyperarousal. It prevents the brain from entering its natural states of relaxation and sleep transition. Melatonin, the hormone responsible for inducing sleep, is suppressed by nighttime exposure to screen light, and even when we do manage to sleep, the quality of that sleep is affected. We don't reach the deeper stages, the ones responsible for memory consolidation, emotional regulation, and physical restoration. The result is waking up tired, as if we had simply shut off instead of truly rested. Neuroscience shows that excess digital stimulation not only fragments sleep, but also compromises the brain's executive functions. Attention, working memory, planning, organization, all of these capabilities are impaired when we live in an environment where the mind never rests. This explains why so many people today struggle to read a book, watch an entire movie, or focus on a task for more than 15 minutes. A brain trained to jump from one stimulus to another loses its focus muscle. And over time, this creates a specific kind of suffering, that of chronic superficiality. Cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBTI, now widely recognized as one of the most effective treatments for sleep disorders, proposes simple yet powerful interventions. Among them, setting consistent times to go to bed and wake up, avoiding screens at least an hour before sleeping, turning the bedroom into a sacred resting space, free from stimulation, and creating calming bedtime rituals like reading, taking a warm bath, listening to soft music, or journaling. These practices help the brain recognize it's time to switch off and gradually restore its natural sleep cycles. In the realm of attention, neuroplasticity offers hope. The brain can relearn how to focus, but it needs training and silence. Practices like meditation, breathing exercises, intentional focus on simple activities, such as walking without a phone, cooking mindfully, or listening to someone without interrupting, work as mental strength training. Each time you resist the urge to distract yourself, you strengthen the muscle of attention. And this strengthening over time transforms the quality of your mind. Spirituality also offers ways to restore balance between stimulation and silence. Sleep, in many traditions, is seen as a sacred moment of surrender, a space between worlds, where the unconscious visits and the soul rests. To neglect this moment is more than a flaw in routine. It is a disconnection from life's natural rhythm. Just as day needs night, movement needs stillness. The soul, too, needs sleep. If today you feel you don't sleep well, can't concentrate, are always tired and scattered, don't blame yourself. You are not failing. You are overwhelmed. And the good news is, this can be reversed. Not with magic formulas, but with small, conscious choices. Start by lowering your phone's brightness at night. Set a time to disconnect. Allow yourself not to respond to everything immediately. Create a bedtime ritual, like someone preparing an altar for their own peace. Rest is sacred. Focus is a treasure, and you deserve to live with both, because a rested mind loves better, creates more lightly, listens more deeply, and above all, lives more truthfully. There is a kind of pain that isn't screamed. It accumulates. It grows slowly, in the silence of distractions, in the habit of rushing, in the constant noise of the world. It's the pain of someone who has lost touch with themselves. You wake up, rush, do, reply, deliver, consume, but somewhere along the way, you forgot to listen to your own mind, your own body, your own heart. You didn't notice when the little pleasures stopped bringing joy. You didn't realize when laughter became rare. You didn't see when you began living on autopilot. This forgetting of the self is a growing phenomenon in the digital age, not due to a lack of information, but because of too much stimulation. The human mind needs silence to organize emotions, reflect on choices, and connect to identity. But when we are constantly exposed to stimuli, notifications, messages, videos, news, opinions, we have neither the time nor the space to listen to what truly matters, our inner voice. And that voice doesn't compete with the others. It whispers, it waits, it asks for attention with gentleness, but when it goes unheard for too long, it becomes sick. And its pain manifests as symptoms: constant anxiety, irritability, emotional fatigue, chronic dissatisfaction, a sense of emptiness, and loss of meaning. Existential psychology states that human suffering often arises from the disconnection between how we live and who we truly are. When our actions don't reflect our values, when our days don't express our emotions, when our choices don't honor our deepest desires, we enter a state of inner misalignment. It's as if we're living a borrowed life, driven by outside expectations instead of our true purpose. And in that state, the mind cries out to return to the self, to return to truth. But how do we find ourselves again in the chaos of excess? Cognitive behavioral therapy suggests starting by identifying the automatic thoughts that guide our daily lives. Ask yourself, is this thought truly mine or was it learned? Is this desire real or was it imposed? Does this goal fulfill me or just exhaust me? These are simple questions, but they act like lanterns in the darkness of overload. In addition, practices like journaling, guided meditation, inner dialogues, and deep conversations with trusted people help focus restore the listening of your original mind, the one that knows how it feels, that knows its limits, that dares to change. From a psychoanalytic perspective, forgetting oneself can be understood as a defense mechanism against the pain of being authentic. In a world that demands masks, often we hide in socially acceptable versions of ourselves because we fear judgment, rejection, or failure. But the cost is the loss of spontaneity, creativity, and genuine joy. Recovering the ability to hear yourself means going through the pain of truth, but on the other side lies freedom. Spirituality also invites us to return. In every tradition, inner silence is seen as a gateway to the sacred. Remembering oneself is not just a psychological act, it is a spiritual awakening. It's the moment you reconnect with what is essential, with what never changes, with what lies beyond the stories of the ego. And there, in that silent space, you recognize yourself, not as a character, not as a profile, but as a living soul, as a sacred presence. If today you feel lost, if you no longer recognize yourself, if you're living on autopilot and don't know how to stop, breathe, close your eyes, place your hand over your chest, feel the rhythm of your breath. You are here. There is still time. You can still hear yourself. You can still return. Your mind, your body, your essence, they are all waiting for you. And the way back begins with a gesture of listening, a decision to pause, the courage to ask, who am I now when no one is watching? The answer will not come from outside. It won't be in the feed or in others' opinions or the next video. It's already inside, and reconnecting with it can change everything. Have you ever found yourself deleting a message several times before sending it, revising a simple post as if it were an academic paper, hesitating to record a video or share an idea out of fear of sounding ridiculous? Has your heart ever raced just imagining what people might think, even when you're not quite sure who those people are? This phenomenon has a name: online performance anxiety, a silent psychological suffering that arises from constant exposure and the unrelenting judgment we endure on social media. And little by little, it corrodes our spontaneity, our creativity, and even our identity. Modern psychology understands that humans naturally crave acceptance, appreciation, and recognition. It's part of our instinct for belonging, but the digital environment distorts this basic need. While in real life we engage with small groups and receive personal emotional feedback, online, we are exposed to thousands of anonymous eyes, often impersonal and harsh, judging us by superficial metrics. The result is a persistent fear, the fear of not being interesting enough, smart enough, attractive enough, productive enough, a fear that paralyzes us and turns us into self-censors of our own voice. Online performance anxiety manifests in many ways: procrastination, extreme self-criticism, perfectionism, fear of exposure, excessive comparison, creative blocks, panic attacks, and even social phobia intensified by hyperexposure. Many begin to develop in two versions of themselves: a postable version that looks safe, polished, and admirable, and a real version filled with insecurities, fears, and contradictions that remains hidden. This gap between the self I show and the self I am gradually creates a psychic split, a disconnection from oneself, which leads to deep emotional pain. Cognitive behavioral therapy offers effective strategies for dealing with this type of anxiety. The first is to identify dysfunctional automatic thoughts, such as "I must be perfect to be accepted," "If I make a mistake, I'll be humiliated," or "My opinion doesn't matter." Challenging these beliefs and replacing them with more realistic and compassionate thoughts is the first step. Another powerful technique is gradual exposure with emotional self-regulation. Allowing yourself to show up little by little without demanding perfection and embracing discomfort as a natural part of the growth process. Healing begins when we stop avoiding fear and start facing it with courage and compassion. Psychoanalysis offers yet another lens. This fear of exposure may be rooted in earlier experiences of rejection, humiliation, or invalidation. Perhaps it was a harsh criticism in childhood, a painful comparison at school, or a public shaming that wounded your self-esteem. The digital world, in this sense, replays that unconscious trauma, as if we're once again on stage, fearing rejection for being who we are. And only by recognizing those wounds can we begin to heal them. Spirituality, in turn, reminds us of an essential truth. You don't need to prove yourself to exist. Your worth isn't measured by your follower count, by praise, or by applause. It lies in the simple fact that you exist. You are a unique being, with your light, your shadows, your path. And your path doesn't need to be perfect, it needs to be real. The world doesn't need more flawless people. It needs real people. People with the courage to be vulnerable, to make mistakes, to laugh at themselves, to grow in front of others without losing their soul in the process. If today you feel like you're living under invisible pressure, trying to meet expectations you don't even recognize, measuring your self-worth through numbers that change by the hour, breathe. You can stop. You can disconnect for a while. You can relearn how to simply exist without constantly having to explain yourself. Your presence in this world doesn't need validation. It is a sacred right. And the more you accept yourself as you are, the more freedom you give others to do the same. There is no performance more beautiful than authenticity, and peace begins when you finally choose to be yourself. Even if the audience doesn't applaud, it has never been so easy to receive a compliment, and never so hard to believe it. We live in the age of likes, quick reactions, and digital hearts. But behind each number, behind every virtual pat on the back, grows a void that dopamine alone can't fill. The dependence on approval, intensified by social media, has turned self-love into an unstable currency, one that rises or falls according to the mood of an invisible audience. We are the generation of the like, but we are also the most anxious, insecure, and self-absorbed generation in modern history, and this combination is dangerous, silent, and deeply painful. Social psychology explains that healthy self-esteem is built on three pillars: realistic self-image, self-compassion, and emotional autonomy. But the digital environment undermines these pillars as fast as it hands out rewards. Self-image becomes shaped by filters and impossible comparisons. Self-compassion is replaced by relentless self-criticism. And emotional autonomy gives way to a constant dependency on others' responses. Will they like it? Will they comment? Is this good enough? Thus, self-esteem stops being a solid inner foundation and becomes a distorted reflection of external metrics. From a neurological perspective, each like or positive comment activates the brain's reward system, releasing dopamine, the neurotransmitter of instant pleasure. Over time, the brain becomes conditioned to seek this type of reinforcement more frequently, creating a compulsive cycle. We post something, wait for approval, receive it or not, and repeat. When the approval doesn't come, it feels like personal failure. When it comes in excess, we craft an artificial version of ourselves just to maintain it. In both cases, we lose touch with our truth. Psychoanalysis sees this behavior as a transference of the maternal gaze to the gaze of the crowd. As children, we seek validation from our parents to shape our identity. When that validation is flawed or absent, we carry a recognition wound, one we later try to heal through larger audiences, now amplified by the internet. The problem is, this new gaze is fragmented, unstable, and impersonal, and no matter how hard we try to please it, it will never be enough to fill what was missing at the root of self-esteem: being seen with love, even when imperfect. Cognitive behavioral therapy offers pathways to rescue self-esteem in its healthiest form. One of them is the practice of internal reinforcement, praising yourself for small victories, recording emotional achievements, cultivating positive inner dialogue, identifying personal strengths not tied to performance. Another essential tool is challenging negative automatic thoughts, like, if no one likes it, I'm irrelevant, no one cares about me, or I'm not good enough. The mind must be re-educated to value what's essential, what remains, even when the internet goes quiet. Spirituality also reminds us of something fundamental. The worth of your being doesn't depend on others' eyes, but on your recognition of your own essence. Self-love is a sacred act, and to cultivate this love is to tell yourself every day, I am worthy, I am enough, I am whole, even without applause. True approval begins in silence, not in the feed. It is born when you are able to look at yourself with kindness, with patience, with respect. When you learn to be your own home, and no longer an emotional beggar chasing after likes. If today you feel like you're living for others' approval, that your self-esteem fluctuates with the numbers, that you compare yourself, criticize yourself, shrink yourself, know this, you are not alone. This is a reflection of the world we're living in, but it doesn't have to be your fate. You can break the cycle. You can reclaim your voice. You can rebuild a relationship with yourself rooted in compassion, presence, and authenticity. You are not the number of followers you have, nor the amount of hearts you receive. You are far more than what the world sees. You are what you feel, and it is in that feeling, deep, quiet, and true, that your real beauty lives. For a long time, talking about digital detox sounded like something alternative, a modern fad, or a privilege reserved for those who could afford to disconnect. But today, with mounting data on mental health, tech addiction, and widespread emotional collapse, we know the truth. Detoxing from technology is no longer a luxury. It is an urgent necessity. It is a form of emotional survival. Because the overstimulation, the lack of silence, and the constant pressure for digital presence are draining our minds, our bodies, and our souls. And this is not about being against technology. It's about reclaiming the right to exist outside of it. The World Health Organization already acknowledges the harmful effects of excessive screen use, sleep disorders, anxiety, depression, technology-induced ADHD, low self-esteem, chronic irritability, mental overload, dopamine addiction, and emotional dysregulation. We sleep less, breathe poorly, eat distractedly, and live in a constant state of alert. All of this because we never disconnect. We never clock out. We never say, enough. The phone is the last thing we touch before sleep, and the first upon waking. And in that seemingly harmless habit, we slowly dissolve our vitality. Digital detox doesn't begin with a drastic act, but with a deep decision to regain control of your own time. It's about consciously choosing where to place your attention. It's about reclaiming your ability to feel bored, to be present, to look inward. Cognitive behavioral therapy shows us that the best way to deal with compulsions is through the gradual replacement of habits. That's why, instead of just dropping the phone, it is far more effective to create rituals that nourish, waking up without screens, walking without headphones, writing with pen and paper, talking while looking into someone's eyes, savoring a full meal without pausing for the feed. Psychoanalysis also warns us, digital addiction isn't just about stimulus. It's often an attempt to numb pain. We avoid silence because silence holds the truth. We run from stillness because in stillness rise the questions we fear. Am I happy with my life? Am I being honest with myself? Am I living or just functioning? The screen is often a distraction from the essential, and detoxing means accepting the soul's invitation to once again hear what matters. Spiritually, too much external connection leads to a lack of inner connection. You can't hear the voice of intuition when there's too much noise. You can't contemplate the sacred without empty space. In every spiritual tradition, retreat is a sacred practice. Fasting from food, from speech, or from stimuli has always been a path to purification. Digital detox, then, becomes a modern way of retreat. It gives the soul a chance to breathe without interference. It allows the spirit to speak again. And you might be wondering, but how do I do this in today's world? How can I work, communicate, and create without technology? The answer isn't to give up everything, but to establish clear, conscious, and compassionate boundaries. Digital detox doesn't mean complete absence. It means selective presence. It means setting periods in your day to be offline without guilt, putting your phone in airplane mode during meals, scheduling social media-free days, using technology as a tool, not as a part of your identity. If today you feel constantly tired, distracted, anxious, like you're losing time and presence to things that don't nourish you, like you sleep poorly and wake up heavy, maybe your soul isn't asking for more effort but less noise, less screen, less pressure, less exposure, and more space, more silence. more you with yourself. Your healing may begin with a simple gesture, turning off the outside world to ignite the world within. To detox is to come home, to come inward, to return to center, where your true essence lives. There is a remedy that cannot be bought at a pharmacy, requires no prescription, has no side effects, and is available to everyone everywhere. Silence. Yet today it is one of the rarest elements of modern life. Silence scares us, unsettles us, makes us uncomfortable. We're so used to noise, screens, notifications, and distractions that when silence arrives, it feels like something is missing. But the truth is, silence is not absence. It is presence in its purest form. And it is within this quiet space that healing begins, the return to the body, to the mind, and to real life. Body-centered psychology teaches us that the body does not lie. When the mind is scattered, the body gets sick. When emotions are ignored, the body screams. When we stay too connected to the virtual world and disconnected from ourselves, it is the body that pays the price. Insomnia, muscle tension, unexplained pain, anxiety attacks, chronic fatigue. That's why the first step toward restoring emotional balance is to reconnect with the body through silence. And this doesn't mean sitting still or meditating like a monk. It means slowing down, being present, and listening to the body's signals with respect and attention. Cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness practices highlight silence as a fundamental therapeutic tool. Simple techniques like paying attention to the breath, walking in silence while observing the sounds around you, eating without distractions, or practicing body scan before sleep help train the mind to remain in the now. And in the now, there is no guilt from the past, no anxiety about the future. There is only presence, and presence is the fertile ground where healing can grow. Another extremely effective technique is guided silence. Setting aside 5 minutes a day to simply close your eyes, sit quietly, and listen. This isn't about meditating the right way, but about allowing the internal noise to dissolve over time. At first, thoughts, restlessness, and memories will surface, but gradually the body relaxes, the mind slows down, and the soul finds space to speak. In this space, many answers arise. Solutions that didn't come with mental effort appear with ease. Old wounds reveal themselves asking to be healed. Forgotten intuitions return. From a psychoanalytic perspective, silence is the stage where unconscious material is allowed to emerge. When we stop filling every gap with external voices, we make space to hear the internal ones. Voices we often avoid out of fear, yet they hold the key to transformation. The voice of the inner child, the voice of repressed desire, the voice of ancestral wisdom that lives within each of us. Listening to those voices takes courage, but it is in silence that they speak the loudest. Spirituality also recognizes silence as a portal to the sacred. In silence we pray without words. In silence we touch the mystery. In silence we hear existence with the ears of the soul. Many spiritual masters affirm that silence is not empty. It is full of God's presence, of essence, of life. And when we silence the external world, we access the inner temple, where peace, clarity, and reunion with what truly matters reside. If today you feel disconnected from your body, your mind is restless, clarity feels out of reach, and you're living in a state of fatigue, know this: perhaps what you need isn't a new piece of content, a new technique, or another solution. Perhaps what you need is a little silence, healing, nurturing, loving silence. A silence that doesn't demand, doesn't pressure, doesn't judge. It simply welcomes. It welcomes you, exactly as you are. No masks, no performance, no need for approval. You can begin now. Take a deep breath, drop your shoulders, close your eyes for a moment and feel. You are here, you are breathing, you exist, and that alone is already a miracle. Amid so much speed, urgency, and excess of stimuli, there is a silent, ancient, and deeply transformative practice that is being rediscovered by modern science and clinical psychology: mindfulness. In a world that constantly pulls us away from ourselves, learning to be fully present in the moment has become a quiet revolution, and this revolution begins with a simple gesture: breathing. Breathing with awareness, with presence, with intention. This is how we begin to reprogram the body, calm the mind, and restore the balance we've lost. Mindfulness, in its most essential definition, is the practice of being fully present in the now, with acceptance and without judgment. It's the ability to notice what is happening inside and around us with curiosity, not trying to change, control, or escape it. When we practice this mindful attention, we reconnect body and mind, restore the nervous system, and begin to interrupt the automatic cycles of stress, anxiety, and mental overactivity caused by constant use of technology. Breathing is the most accessible and powerful anchor for mindfulness. Neuroscience has proven that conscious breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for feelings of calm, relaxation, and safety. When we breathe slowly, deeply through the nose with attention to the flow of air, we send signals to the brain that we are safe. This lowers cortisol levels, the stress hormone, regulates heart rate, improves mental clarity, and promotes a state of presence that neutralizes the chaos around us. Simple conscious breathing techniques like the 4-7-8 method, inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 7, exhale for 8. Box breathing, 4 seconds for each phase, inhale, hold, exhale, hold. Or simply, breathing and counting each cycle up to 10 are exercises that can be practiced anytime, anywhere. In traffic, before bed, between meetings, during moments of anxiety or boredom. They don't require apps or gurus. They only require a commitment to your own well-being. Cognitive behavioral therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, integrate mindfulness as a key tool for mental reprogramming. By observing our own thoughts with distance and without judgment, we learn to disidentify from the anxious mind. We realize we are not our thoughts. We are the space where thoughts happen, and that insight changes everything. It gives us back control, not through rigid control, but through the freedom to choose. I can listen, but I don't have to obey. I can feel, but I don't have to identify. On a psychoanalytic level, the practice of mindfulness is an opportunity to listen to the unconscious with less noise. When we quiet the rational mind, we make space for deeper material to emerge with greater clarity. Repressed emotions, forgotten intuitions, true desires, all of these can rise more clearly when we stop filling every second with noise and distraction. Spirituality in all traditions teaches us that to breathe is to pray with the body. It is the most sacred act of life, the first upon birth and the last upon departure. Every breath is a gift, a renewal, a chance to return to the center. To breathe with presence is to reconnect with essence, with the divine, with the part of ourselves that watches everything with compassion and serenity. And that part is always there, waiting for us to pause for a few seconds and say, I am here. If today you feel like everything is moving too fast, your mind is exhausted, you've gotten lost in the flood of notifications and obligations, stop for a moment. Take a deep breath. Once more. Feel the air coming in. Feel the body existing. Feel the now unfolding. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to fix everything. You only need, in this moment, to be. Because in the chaos of the world, the true refuge is not in the networks, the answers, or external solutions. The true refuge is within you, and it opens with a single breath. Technology is not the enemy. It never was. What makes us sick is not the devices, the networks, or the apps, but the way we relate to them. Technology can be a bridge or a prison. It can be a tool for connection or an instrument of escape. It can be sacred or empty. Everything depends on the level of awareness with which we use it. And at the speed the world is moving, developing a conscious relationship with technology is not just desirable, it's vital. Because those who don't learn to navigate the digital world wisely risk losing themselves forever. Modern behavioral psychology teaches us that habits are formed through repetition and reinforcement, and today, many of our digital behaviors are not conscious. They are conditioned reflexes. We wake up and grab the phone before taking a deep breath. We eat while scrolling the feed without tasting the food. We fall asleep watching videos without listening to our own thoughts. We pay more attention to notifications than to our feelings. This automatism steals from us what is most human: presence. But awareness can be relearned. Cognitive behavioral therapy proposes, as a starting point, the observation of digital behavior without judgment. What time of day do you reach for your phone the most? What emotions come before that act? What are you seeking when you unlock the screen? How do you feel after spending too much time connected? Conscious technology begins with this kind of listening, because we can only change what we acknowledge. And when we recognize that we are using technology to numb pain, escape boredom, avoid difficult conversations, or fill internal voids, we take the first step toward regaining control. The goal of conscious technology is not to leave the internet. It's to come back to yourself while still being in it. It means making choices. It means using social media as a channel, not as a destination. It's knowing when to be online and when to step back. It's deciding what to consume and what to silence. It's turning your phone from a tyrant into an ally. This can be done through small daily practices, turning off unnecessary notifications, setting fixed times for social media use, creating screen-free zones like your bed or the dinner table, practicing a digital detox day each week, small acts that create big impacts on emotional well-being. From a psychoanalytic perspective, technology must also be integrated into our symbolic world. This means giving meaning to what we consume, following accounts that inspire us, that emotionally nourish us, that invite us to reflect and must not just compare. It also means recognizing when seemingly harmless screen time masks unresolved emotional needs and seeking support to process them with maturity. The soul doesn't crave dopamine. It longs for depth. Spirituality, in turn, reminds us that the soul speaks in silence, in stillness, in deep listening, and that all excess distances us from the sacred. In that sense, conscious technology is a spiritual path. It is the art of balancing information with wisdom, of knowing that not everything needs to be shared, that not every message needs an instant reply, that not every presence needs to be digital. Being connected to the world is important, but being connected to the soul is essential. If today you feel like you've lost control of your time, that you're stuck in digital habits that don't nourish you, that you feel drained from being constantly online, don't blame yourself. This is the result of a system designed to keep you this way. But the good news is that you can reprogram that system. You can choose. You can create a new way of being in the digital world, one where presence comes before posting, the soul comes before the audience, and well-being comes before the algorithm. Technology can be a bridge. It can be art. It can be healing. All it takes is returning to your center. All it takes is that when you touch a screen, you don't forget to also touch your truth. There is a question that urgently needs to be asked. Where do you live when you're not on social media? Where does your consciousness reside when the world goes silent, when no one is watching, when the screen is turned off? For many people, the answer is frightening. I don't know. We've spent so much time looking outward, exposed, connected, available, that we've forgotten the way back inside. And that's why so many people feel lost, even when surrounded by others. That's why even with a full calendar, the days feel empty. That's why sometimes even lying in our own bed, we don't feel at home. We've lost presence. We've lost the address of our own soul. Rebuilding presence is not a luxury for the few. It's a vital necessity for all. And presence is not about being still. It's not the absence of movement. Presence is being whole in what you do, in what you feel, in what you choose. It's acting with intention, feeling with depth, choosing with awareness. It's not abandoning yourself in the middle of the day. It's not losing yourself for the sake of urgencies that aren't yours. Presence is the opposite of autopilot. And in a world that lives outside, it is a quiet act of resistance. Humanistic psychology teaches that a person becomes unwell when they disconnect from their own essence, when they live a life that's not theirs, when they repeat routines without questioning, when they respond to expectations without listening to their own desires. And the return to presence is what heals. It brings back meaning, texture, color, and depth to existence. But how do we do that in the midst of the rush, the overload of information, the constant demands? The answer is simple, yet powerful. One step at a time, one act of attention each day, one commitment to the now. Cognitive behavioral therapy offers practical tools to help us regain awareness of the present moment. One effective practice is the internal check-in. Several times a day, pause for 30 seconds and ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? What is my body asking for? Am I here or on autopilot? This small gesture can prevent impulsive decisions, prevent anxiety attacks, and above all, rebuild your connection to your own existence. Another powerful practice is conscious gratitude. At the end of the day, write down or simply recall 3 moments when you were fully present, even if brief, and give thanks for them. Psychoanalysis reminds us that the return to presence also requires courage to face what lives in the silence. Often we stay too busy to avoid feeling what's stored within. Reconnecting with yourself can bring tears, old truths, or long-buried sadness, but it can also bring relief, reconciliation, and strength. Because once we live within ourselves again, we no longer need to find home in others. We no longer beg for attention, validation, or meaning. We have returned to the home. And the home is the body. The home is the feeling. The home is the now. Spiritually, rebuilding presence is reconnecting with the divine that dwells in the moment. In all traditions, presence is sacred. The here and now is the only time where God, truth, light, or essence can be found. Because the past is memory, the future is illusion, but the present is a miracle. And when we live within ourselves again, we begin to live every gesture as a ritual, every word as a prayer, every silence as a temple. If today you feel that you no longer live in yourself, that you're always outside, always ahead, always running, breathe. The way back begins with a single step. And that step is the decision to no longer abandon yourself, to be with yourself in your body, in your feelings, in your choices. Your soul doesn't need you to fix everything right now. It just wants you to return, to listen, to say with tenderness, I am here. And that in itself is already healing. We've never been so connected, and at the same time, so spiritually disconnected. In the constant noise of notifications, in the speed of timelines, in the never-ending pressure for digital presence, something subtle yet essential has been lost. The sense of the sacred, that which cannot be measured, explained, monetized, or liked, that which doesn't fit in a story, nor is captured in precise words, that which reminds us that life is more than productivity, appearance, or results. Spirituality, and in the face of screens advancing into every corner of our routines, a question grows increasingly urgent. Is there still space for the sacred in the digital world? Spirituality, unlike institutional religion, is the inner space where we seek meaning, transcendence, connection with something greater than ourselves, whether that greater is God, nature, the cosmos, love, or consciousness itself. And that space, by its very nature, requires silence, presence, listening, and depth, precisely the things that the digital environment tends to fragment. When we are constantly consumed by what's happening outside, opinions, stimuli, expectations, there's no room left to hear what pulses within. And without that inner silence, the sacred becomes inaudible. Transpersonal psychology, a branch of psychology that integrates the spiritual aspects of human experience, affirms that humans become unwell when disconnected from the transcendent dimension of life. Anxiety increases, depression deepens, existential emptiness takes hold. Because while we can survive with technology, we cannot live with purpose without spirituality. And purpose is not something we find outside. It is born within, in silence, in ritual, in contemplation, in mystery. But there is indeed a way to reconcile spirituality with the digital age, and that reconciliation begins with the intention behind how we use technology. A video can be a prayer, a text can be a portal, a song can be a temple, a conversation can be a healing act. When we use the internet consciously, we transform noise into a channel, the tool into a bridge, the connection into communion. It is possible to find spirituality in the digital, but only if we are present when we engage, only if we infuse the gesture with soul, only if technology becomes an extension of our truth and not of our escape. Cognitive behavioral therapy suggests identifying the core values that drive us. And for many, these values have spiritual roots: compassion, love, service, growth, peace, connection. When we align our actions, our choices, and even our use of technology with these values, life gains coherence. And that coherence is a form of applied spirituality. It's not about disconnecting from the world. It's about inhabiting the world with intention, awareness, and presence. Psychoanalysis, in turn, recognizes the sacred as part of the symbolic constitution of the self. The search for a greater meaning is one of the forces that support identity construction. When this dimension is neglected, crisis arises. What's the point of all this? What's the meaning of living this way? Why do I still feel empty? The answer often isn't found in one more goal or one more post, but in a reopening the inner space of the sacred. And that space doesn't have to be religious. It just needs to be real, alive, authentic. If today you feel like you've lost your connection to spirituality, like you're distant from yourself, like everything feels mechanical, dry, soulless, know this: the sacred never left you. It simply went silent, waiting for you to go silent too. Even today you can create a simple ritual. Turn off the screen, light a candle, listen to your breath, give thanks for something small, place your hands over your heart and say, I am here, and something greater is holding me. Spirituality doesn't need a stage. It only needs presence. And you can be that presence now, even among the screens, because the sacred hasn't disappeared. It's just waiting for you to look again with deeper eyes. One of the biggest causes of emotional exhaustion in the digital age is not the use of technology itself, but rather the absence of clear boundaries. We live in a time where everything is urgent, everything is available, everything is accessible, including us. And in this environment, we've learned to say yes to every message, notification, task, update, and request, even when the body is tired, the mind is saturated, and the heart is begging for silence. Setting boundaries with technology has become an act of radical self-care, a gesture of emotional preservation, a commitment to mental health. But for many, saying no to excess still carries a heavy weight of guilt. Cognitive psychology shows that this guilt often stems from an internalized belief that we must always be available in order to be accepted, loved, or recognized, that if we don't respond quickly, we'll let someone down, that if we're not constantly up to date, we'll fall behind, that if we're not always producing, we'll be forgotten. These beliefs, while understandable in today's world, are deeply harmful because they make us place other people's needs above our own. And the consequence is constant depletion, a sense of emotional invasion, and in many cases severe symptoms of anxiety, irritability, and burnout. Learning to set boundaries with technology is learning to say, my time matters, my energy has value, and my peace is a priority. And that starts with small but powerful actions. The first is establishing fixed usage times. This applies to social media, messaging, and emails. Instead of being constantly available, choose specific periods to connect, and outside of those times, allow yourself to be present in what truly matters: your health, your real connections, your rest. Another effective strategy is to create screen-free zones. Your bed, the dinner table, family moments, leisure activities. These spaces must be sacred, protected, respected. Cognitive behavioral therapy also encourages us to have unopened conversations with those close to us about these boundaries. Often, we feel guilty because we believe the other person will feel ignored, rejected, or hurt. But in reality, when we communicate with clarity and warmth, saying, for example, I need some time away from my phone, but I'll get back to you with full attention later, the bond actually strengthens. Because healthy boundaries don't push people away, they preserve relationships, they prevent exhaustion, resentment, and emotional overload. They show that we know how to care for ourselves, and thus, we can care for others with greater quality. From a psychoanalytic perspective, the difficulty in setting boundaries can also be linked to early trauma, experiences of abandonment, rejection, or emotional invalidation. When we were taught that we would only be loved if we were always available, we learned to say yes even when it hurt. And now, in adulthood, we repeat that pattern, but with technology as the new mediator of affection. Breaking that cycle takes courage, but it's possible. And it begins with the awareness that true love does not demand constant presence. It honors genuine presence. Spirituality reminds us of something essential. Even God rested on the seventh day. Silence, retreat, and pause are sacred practices in every tradition. No human being was meant to be available all the time. Not for the world, not for others, not for machines. The spirit needs time to regenerate. The soul needs breaks to reconnect. And saying no to digital excess is actually saying yes to what matters most: your presence, your peace, your truth. If today you feel exhausted, constantly available, Overwhelmed by endless stimuli and struggle to set boundaries for fear of guilt or rejection? Take a breath. Remember, taking care of yourself is not selfish, it's responsibility. And every time you honor your own timing, you teach the world to do the same. You inspire others to protect themselves too, and you rebuild an inner space where life can blossom more gently. You don't need to be always online. You just need to be fully present where you choose to be. And sometimes that begins with a simple and liberating, "Today, I choose me." There is something increasingly forgotten in times of hyperconnection. We are a body. Before we are thoughts, before we are opinions, before we are profiles, we are breath, blood, muscles, skin, heartbeat. And yet, we live as if we only inhabit the mind, immersed in mental stimuli, overloaded with ideas, internally accelerated, outwardly still. This imbalance between mental overload and physical inertia has come at a high cost. Anxiety, insomnia, chronic pain, emotional numbness, disconnection from oneself. That's why the reconnecting with the body is not vanity. It's healing, it's reconnection, it's returning to a whole existence. The body is the first and last home of the soul. When we inhabit it with presence, something shifts. Thoughts slow down, emotions settle, breathing aligns. Neuroscience has already shown that physical movement, especially conscious movement such as walking, dancing, stretching, yoga, or light aerobic activity, regulates dopamine, serotonin, and endorphin levels. Neurotransmitters directly linked to emotional well-being. In other words, moving your body is a natural antidepressant, an organic anxiolytic, a restorer of self-esteem. Body-centered psychology and cognitive behavioral therapy also point to the body as a therapeutic ally. Often the mind lies. It rationalizes, denies, distorts, but the body does not. The body feels. It shows where it hurts. It stores memories. It repeats gestures that reveal trauma. And more importantly, it offers a path back. Because when we walk with presence, for example, thoughts begin to follow the rhythm of our steps. When we dance without self-censorship, stuck emotions find expression. When we breathe deeply, the nervous system shifts from alert mode back to safety. This is not about intense workouts or following beauty standards. It's about moving to remember that you exist, using the body as an anchor to escape the mental storm, reconnecting with your senses, with touch, with warmth, with posture, with the weight of your feet on the ground. Small daily movements done with awareness have the power to restore the connection between mind and body, bringing back what we lost with the excess of screens, the perception of the now. Psychoanalysis also sees the body as a territory of desire and language. Many anxieties never found words, but express themselves through physical symptoms, pain, tension, psychosomatic illnesses. When we reconnect with the body not just as a tool, but as the subject of experience, we create space for it to speak. And when we listen to the body, it guides us with more wisdom than many thoughts ever could. The body knows, and all it asks is that we listen again. Spirituality, in turn, sees the body as a temple. In many traditions, dancing is prayer, breathing is meditation, walking is a sacred practice. The body is the interface between the visible and the invisible. And the more we honor it, with care, with movement, with attention, the more we access the divine within. Because God also breathes within the body. The soul pulses through the skin. And inner silence begins with the movement that takes the mind off the spinning wheel and brings it back to center. If today you feel trapped in your mind, thinking too much and feeling too little, tired even without moving, maybe it's time to return. Return to your body. Start with something simple. Stand up, stretch your arms, breathe deeply. Walk slowly, even if only for 5 minutes. Gently touch your own skin. Observe your feet touching the floor. Feel the weight of your body present. You're not floating. You're here, alive, whole, and your body is your most sacred home. Taking care of it is taking care of yourself. And sometimes all you need is to give your body the chance to bring you back home. We live in an era where being alone is almost taboo. There's a collective anxiety that tries to fill every empty space with sound, image, company, or virtual connection, as if silence were dangerous, as if the absence of others meant abandonment, as if solitude always needed to be avoided. But there's a profound difference between being alone and feeling lonely. A difference that, when understood, can completely transform our relationship with existence itself. Because, in truth, solitude, when embraced with awareness, can become one of the deepest ways to reconnect with the soul. Psychology teaches us that there are two types of solitude: pathological solitude, marked by suffering, emptiness, and abandonment, and constructive solitude, which is a space of reflection, creativity, inner listening, and reconnection. In today's hyperconnected world and culture of constant presence, we have unlearned the second kind, and so every time we find ourselves alone, it feels like something is wrong. We rush to fill the absence with social media, notifications, endless entertainment. But what we are truly avoiding is the encounter with what lies within, and only reveals itself in silence. Cognitive behavioral therapy invites us to gradually reframe solitude. Instead of seeing it as failure, lack, or punishment, we can begin to explore it as a safe space. We can learn to spend time with ourselves lovingly, walking in silence, journaling our feelings, observing our thoughts with curiosity, listening to music that moves us, preparing a meal for ourselves with care, reading something nourishing. These practices transform being alone into a balm, moment of emotional nourishment. From a psychoanalytic perspective, the fear of solitude is often rooted in childhood experiences of abandonment, neglect, or rejection. The absence of others brings up an old pain that we believe we cannot bear. But when we face that pain, not to escape, but to listen, something changes. We discover that we are stronger than we thought, that we don't need constant approval, that we can be enough for ourselves, at least for a while. And paradoxically, the more comfortable we become in our own presence, the more whole we feel in the presence of others. Spirituality sees solitude not as absence, but as sacred space. In nearly all traditions, silence, retreat, and time alone are essential for hearing the divine. Jesus went to the desert, Buddha meditated alone under a tree, monks live in silent cells, shamans isolate themselves to listen to the spirits of the forest. Because only in deep silence can we hear what cannot be said aloud. The sacred reveals itself when we stop filling and start receiving. If today you fear solitude, if you feel anxious when there are no messages, if you avoid being alone with yourself, if you confuse being alone with being unloved, breathe. And remember, being alone is a human condition. Feeling lonely is an emotional construction. And you can, in fact, rebuild that space. You can learn to be your own best friend. You can learn to inhabit your silence like entering a temple, not to hide, but to find yourself. Healthy solitude doesn't isolate, it deepens. It doesn't hurt, it heals. It doesn't reject others, it strengthens the self. And when we learn to be alone with ease, we open space for encounters that are freer, truer, more conscious, because they don't come from lack, but from wholeness. You are enough, you are presence, and your own company can become the most welcoming home you've ever known. There are moments in life when everything feels disconnected. Nothing makes sense, bonds fall apart, certainties vanish, and what once held us up no longer supports us. It's as if we're walking through emotional rubble of identity, relationships, and purpose. And in this chaos, in this apparent collapse of meaning, one of the most powerful questions a human being can ask emerges. Who am I now? That question, though painful, is the starting point for something extraordinary, the reinvention of the self. Because as paradoxical as it may seem, chaos is often the womb of rebirth. Emotional disconnection, so common in the digital age, can manifest in many ways: exhaustion, anxiety, emptiness, loss of joy, isolation, identity crisis. And while it may seem like a failure, it is also a signal that the way we've been living no longer serves us, that the identity we wore has grown too tight, that something inside us is asking for change, even if we don't yet know what. It is in this in-between space, between what no longer is and what has not yet become, that self-awareness becomes vital. Existential psychology invites us to see these crises not as endings, but as passages. The philosopher Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor, said that the search for meaning is the essential drive of the human psyche. And when that meaning collapses, it's not the end, it's the opening. because only those who lose the ground beneath them are capable of finding wings. Self-knowledge often emerges from this collapse, from facing our own abysses with courage, from asking questions we never dared to before, from accepting that pain also reveals us. Cognitive behavioral therapy suggests simple but powerful practices to reconnect with oneself in times of chaos. Journaling raw emotions, identifying automatic thoughts that arise in pain, naming the values that remain even when everything else crumbles, creating small routines that bring structure back to daily life. These small acts serve as anchors in the storm, as reminders that, even in pieces, we are still whole inside. Psychoanalysis goes further. It reveals that our current chaos often echoes old wounds, experiences of abandonment, insecurity, invisibility, and by naming those wounds, allowing them to surface, giving them symbolic meaning, we reintegrate them. What was shadow becomes language. What was pain transforms its shape. And in doing so, we turn disconnection into reconstruction. Because the path of self-awareness isn't linear, it's a spiral. And each crisis invites us to turn again toward the center. Spirituality in turn sees chaos as a call to surrender, to let go, to recognize that we are not in control, and that's okay, that we are part of something greater, that life has cycles, and sometimes we must die inside to be born anew. Many ancestral rites of passage are built around exactly that, the symbolic collapse of the old self so that the new one can emerge. And the good news is, this ritual can happen inside you right now, if you have the courage to go through it instead of running away. If today you feel disconnected, lost, tired, broken, breathe. The pain you feel is not a flaw, it's a portal. The confusion you're in is not a punishment, it's an invitation, and you don't have to have all the answers right now. You just need to stay with yourself. You just need to listen to what the chaos is trying to tell you. Because sometimes the internal mess is only the beginning of a new story, more authentic, more powerful, more yours. You can rebuild yourself, not as you were, but as you never imagined you could be. And this process, however long it takes, begins with one silent decision, not to give up on yourself, even when everything feels meaningless. We have never been so connected, and at the same time, so absent. In an era where a message can cross oceans in seconds, deep bonds have become increasingly rare. And the reason isn't lack of contact, but lack of presence. We are surrounded by notifications, yet starving for genuine attention. Touch has been replaced by likes, eye contact by emojis, listening by automatic replies. And this comes at a cost: loneliness in pairs, shallow friendships, interrupted conversations, anxious affection. It is urgent that we reclaim something the digital world has been slowly taking from us: the art of presence. Contemporary psychology shows that healthy emotional bonds depend on one essential ingredient: mindful attention. When we are truly present with someone, we communicate more than words. We communicate care, value, respect. A conversation infused with presence heals more than 1,000 rushed pieces of advice. A sincere gaze is worth more than a flood of messages. Being with someone in body and soul is a therapeutic act for both the giver and the receiver. Cognitive behavioral therapy suggests practices for deepening relationships, turning off the phone during meals, asking open-ended questions with genuine interest, validating the other's emotions without trying to fix them, practicing active listening. These are simple actions, yet revolutionary in an age of chronic distraction, because they say in silence, "You matter to me." And when someone truly feels seen and heard, something changes. The bond flourishes, love matures, friendship strengthens. Psychoanalysis helps us understand that the difficulty in being present with others often stems from the difficulty in being present with ourselves. People who avoid deep conversations, who retreat into screens, who trade connection for distraction, are often fleeing from their own emptiness. We can only sustain presence with others when we've learned to tolerate silence within ourselves. That's why every bond begins with the internal bond. The more we listen to ourselves, the more we can listen to others. The more we embrace our own emotions, the more we can embrace someone else's. Spirituality reminds us that every human encounter is also an encounter with the divine. Being fully present with someone is a sacred practice. Jesus wept with those who suffered, looked people in the eye, walked beside them, Buddha taught compassionate listening. The Sufi masters speak of loving as if praying. In all traditions, presence is a form of love. To love with attention, with time, with listening, with a present body. And that is possible even in digital times, if we choose to truly show up. If today you feel that your connections are fragile, that your conversations are shallow, that loneliness seeps in even when you're surrounded by people, perhaps it's time to change the rhythm, to put the phone down for a few minutes, to look into someone's eyes without hurry, to listen without interrupting, to simply be, truly, because bonds are not built with speed, but with depth, and depth demands presence. You don't have to be available to everyone all the time, but you can choose to be fully with someone for a few moments, and that in today's world is already a miracle. In times of algorithms and artificial intelligence, where everything seems measurable, predictable, and immediate, a kind of emptiness emerges that can't be filled by data or likes. It's a silent emptiness, one that shows up in the middle of the night as we scroll endlessly, unsure of what we're searching for. It's an emptiness that hurts even when we're surrounded by stimulation, and it is precisely in that space that a fundamental question arises. What is the meaning of all this? More than a philosophical inquiry, this is a calling, an opening to something that technology cannot replace: spirituality. Spirituality is not necessarily about religion. It is, above all, a state of inner connection. A reminder that we are more than the thinking mind and the consuming body, that there is a spark within us that pulses beyond logic, status, and performance, that there is a sacred space where silence dwells, where intuition lives, where surrender happens, and where true presence resides. And this space needs to be nurtured, especially in a world that constantly pulls us outward. Transpersonal psychology sees spirituality as an essential part of mental health. Carl Jung said that the healing of many neuroses was tied to the reconnection with the sacred. When we lose meaning, we lose our center. And when we find it again, even in a subjective and deeply personal way, something within us realigns. The suffering doesn't disappear, but it gains shape. The pain doesn't vanish, but it takes on purpose, and the fragmented self begins to reintegrate with the whole. Spirituality also offers us practices, not to escape reality, but to move through it with more presence. Meditating, breathing consciously, contemplating nature, praying, expressing gratitude, serving others, embracing silence. These are all ways to return to the center. And it doesn't matter if you believe in God, the universe, life, or mystery. What matters is that you have a place within you that doesn't need Wi-Fi to connect. A space where you can rest from the overload of noise and remember what truly matters. Psychoanalysis might see this spiritual space as the reconnection with the symbolic, with that which gives meaning to human experience, with the unconscious that lives in our dreams, our art, and our most profound gestures. In this sense, spirituality is a return to what makes us human, and in a time of machines, productivity, and virtual comparison, that return is an act of resistance. If today you feel disconnected from yourself, if you've lost the meaning of things, if everything feels like soulless repetition, maybe it's time to pause. Pause to listen to what lies behind the noise, to ask yourself, what truly nourishes me? What soothes my soul? Where does my sacred live? Because technology may take us far, but only spirituality takes us within, and it is there, within, that you'll find the peace you've been searching for, the answer you need. The path that's been waiting for you to slow down so it could finally reveal itself. We live in a world of excess, of information, of choices, of stimulation, of emotional demands. Everything feels urgent, everything demands a response, everything calls us to do more, be more, give more. And in this constant whirlwind, we accumulate not just objects and tasks, but also emotional burdens that suffocate the soul, guilt that isn't ours, expectations from others, toxic comparisons, relationships that no longer make sense, content we consume without processing. There comes a moment when the mind can no longer cope, and the body starts to send signals. Anxiety rises, insomnia appears, fatigue becomes chronic, and then comes a silent call: return to what's essential. Emotional minimalism is more than a trend. It's a therapeutic need. It's about learning to live with less, but with more presence. Less noise, more listening. Less obligation, more meaning. Fewer superficial relationships. Deeper and more genuine bonds. It's an invitation to look inward and ask, what do I truly need? What really nourishes me? What can I let go of? Because mental health isn't about handling everything. It's about choosing wisely where to place your energy. Cognitive behavioral therapy helps us identify automatic thoughts and behaviors that overwhelm us. The activity log technique, for instance, allows us to map where we spend our time and energy and realize that many of these actions don't serve us well. From there, we can begin to say no more firmly, to pause without guilt, and to prioritize what truly nourishes us. Emotional minimalism is born from clarity, and clarity is born from stillness. Psychoanalysis offers a deeper perspective. It reveals that this emotional overload is often a reflection of unconscious desires, unresolved gaps, attempts to fill inner voids with outer excess. We buy too much, work too much, distract ourselves too much, just to avoid feeling. But feeling is what heals us, and feeling requires space. So by removing what is too much, we create room for what truly matters, to listen to our emotions, to name our desires, to face pain with courage, and to allow the new to enter. Spirituality sees this return to the essential as a process of detachment, of trusting that we don't have to carry the world on our shoulders, that we can let go of control, of ego, of image, that we can live more lightly. In many traditions, silence, simplicity, and emptiness are seen as forms of wisdom, because it is in emptiness that meaning blooms, and in simplicity that the soul breathes. If today you feel overwhelmed, anxious, lost amidst countless stimuli, maybe you don't need one more solution. Maybe you need less weight, less pressure, less distraction, and more truth, more calm, more of you. Emotional minimalism is not a renunciation. It's a reunion, a return to what truly matters. And what truly matters has always lived inside of you. It's not just the big events that shape our mental health. It's the quiet gestures repeated every day. Small choices, small silences, small habits. It's easy to believe we need a radical shift to feel well. But most of the time, what transforms our emotional life are minimal rituals with deep effects. It's not about having more time, but about learning to use it with intention. Because the soul is nourished by what we do with presence, and daily life can be a space of healing if we know how to ritualize it. In the rush of the modern world, many have lost the sense of consciously lived time. They wake up already on alert, check their phone before even getting out of bed, eat quickly, work under pressure, go to sleep with a cluttered mind. The day becomes a loop of automation, and a mind without pauses eventually falls ill. Creating wellness rituals is a way to reclaim control over our inner time. They are conscious pauses, repeated practices that nourish, calm, and reorganize our psyche. Like lighting a candle before bed, writing down 3 things you're grateful for in the morning, sipping tea silently while looking out the window, going for a short walk without your phone, or even taking a deep breath before each meal. Simple gestures, but sacred. Positive psychology reinforces the importance of these rituals. Establishing intentional self-care practices stimulates dopamine and serotonin and strengthens the neural pathways linked to well-being. Research shows that activities like keeping a gratitude journal, practicing short meditations, or setting small goals significantly increase the feeling of purpose and emotional stability. The secret lies in consistency, in repetition with affection. Because every ritual is a reminder, you are worthy of care. From a psychoanalytic perspective, daily rituals also serve as symbolic containers. In a world of excess, they offer structure and predictability. They become inner frameworks that support the self, especially during times of crisis. Having an emotional routine is like having a tidy inner home, and even if everything around is in chaos, that shelter remains. Moreover, to ritualize the everyday is to bring new meaning to life, to rediscover the sacred in the ordinary, the extraordinary in the mundane. Spirituality, in turn, sees rituals as bridges between the material and the invisible. Each small gesture can become a silent prayer, an offering of presence, a way to consecrate the moment. Cultivating rituals is a way of remembering that life doesn't have to be extraordinary to be profound. It only needs to be lived with soul. If today you feel like you're living on autopilot, that your days pass without memory, that your body is present but your mind is not. Maybe it's time to create new rituals. You don't need to change everything. Start with a gesture, a minute, a symbol, a small act of care. Little by little, daily life stops being just a routine and starts becoming a source of comfort, healing, reconnection. You can turn the ordinary into sacred. All it takes is the choice to live with presence. And your emotional well-being will thank you. Every single day, we've never had so much access to other people's lives, and maybe we've never felt so insufficient. Social media, which was created to connect us, ended up building showcases of perfection, where everyone seems more beautiful, happier, and more successful than we are. And even though we rationally know that what we see is only a carefully edited part of reality, something inside us compares, and it hurts. Other people's success becomes a trigger. Their happiness becomes a mirror of our own lack, and without realizing it, we sink into a cycle of silent envy, harsh self-criticism, and chronic insecurity. Constant comparison makes us sick because it disconnects us from ourselves. It makes us look at life through the lens of what's missing, not what's present. And it makes us forget that every human being has their own timing, pain, story, and journey. Positive psychology shows that the more we compare, the less we recognize our own values, and that undermines our self-esteem, robs us of gratitude, and disconnects us from our uniqueness. Because you can't blossom while constantly staring at someone else's garden. Cognitive behavioral therapy offers an important exercise to identify automatic comparative thoughts and replace them with realistic and self-compassionate ones. For example, when you feel envy or discomfort about someone else's success, you can ask yourself, what does this reveal about my own desires? Or, what can I admire and learn from this? Envy doesn't have to be a forbidden emotion. It can be a sign, a reminder of what truly matters to us. And when we welcome it consciously, it transforms into motivation rather than poison. Psychoanalysis goes even deeper. It understands that envy is born from primary wounds, feelings of abandonment, frustration, and lack. Often we're not angry at the other person, we're angry at ourselves for not being who we imagined we should be. Someone else's success highlights those wounds. But if we look deeper, we find that beneath envy lies a legitimate desire, and the healing doesn't come from dimming someone else's light, but from igniting our own. Spirituality offers another perspective, that every human being has a unique path, that the soul's timing is not the same as the algorithms, that true success is living in alignment with your own values, not with external expectations. Constant comparison is like measuring a tree with a fish's ruler. It doesn't make sense, it denies your essence, and it stifles the beauty of what only you came into this world to be. If today you feel that comparison is stealing your peace, that you're shrinking in the face of others' achievements, that your light is fading from chasing standards that aren't yours, breathe. Remember, your worth doesn't depend on anyone else's stage. Your journey is yours alone, and your light doesn't need to compete to shine. Come back to yourself. Acknowledge your seeds. Celebrate your small steps. And understand this, the only fair comparison is with who you were yesterday, not with who others pretend to be today. Have you ever felt exhausted for no apparent reason? As if you had run a marathon without moving an inch? As if the simple act of existing, replying to messages, checking notifications, keeping up with the news, and maintaining the appearance of functionality was already too heavy to bear? Welcome to digital exhaustion, an invisible, silent, yet deeply real fatigue. It's the emotional collapse born from excessive stimulation and a lack of true pauses. We live in a constant state of alert. Notifications, screens, sounds, demands, comparisons. Our brains, designed to operate in cycles of rest and activity, are now bombarded 24 hours a day. And when we ignore our limits, the body speaks up. Insomnia appears. Irritability, forgetfulness, lack of joy, nameless anxiety. And the most alarming part, we get used to it. We normalize discomfort. We treat fatigue as weakness, rest as laziness, and silence as wasted time. Contemporary psychology already recognizes digital fatigue as a risk factor for depression, burnout, and anxiety disorders. Being constantly available, accessible, productive, and up to date comes at a high cost. The human mind wasn't made for so many open tabs. That's why one of the greatest acts of self-care today is to disconnect consciously, not only from screens, but from everything that drains us without giving anything back. Cognitive behavioral therapy recommends powerful and practical interventions, setting time limits for social media use, practicing a weekly offline day, creating clear boundaries with notifications and apps, and above all, incorporating moments of mental recovery throughout the day. Short 10-minute pauses to breathe deeply, walk in silence, or observe nature are enough to reboot the emotional system. It's the pause that regenerates. It's the silence that heals. Psychoanalysis helps us understand that emotional saturation often reveals an inner emptiness we're trying to fill with activity. Constantly doing something can be a way to avoid being with oneself. And behind digital exhaustion, there's often a fear of emptiness, of loneliness, of listening inwardly. When we disconnect from distractions, we face what we've been avoiding. But it's exactly there, in the silence, that healing begins. In spirituality, excess is seen as an imbalance between being and having, between doing and simply existing. The world shouts, but the soul whispers. And to hear that inner voice, we must turn down the world's volume. Contemplative traditions from various cultures teach that peace is born from simplicity, that stillness is a practice, that presence is a gift, and that life only fully reveals itself to those who have the courage to pause. If everything feels like too much today, if you wake up tired, go to sleep restless, get irritated easily, and feel like you're hanging by a thread, maybe the problem isn't you. Maybe the world is simply moving too fast for your natural rhythm. And maybe the answer isn't to move faster, but to slow down consciously. Disconnecting isn't escape, it's survival. And more than that, it's reconnection with what truly matters, with your body, your peace, and your silence. When we talk about mental health, it's common to think only of thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and emotions. But there's a silent, deep, and often overlooked component: the body. The body feels everything. It records, it remembers, it warns. And in the digital age, where our minds are hyper-connected, our bodies are increasingly dissociated, stagnant, tense, compressed in front of screens, breathing poorly, sleeping poorly, eating in haste. And all of this directly affects our emotional physiology, even if we don't realize it right away. The relationship between the body and emotions is intense and bidirectional. Emotional states alter physiological functioning, and bodily states directly influence our emotional balance. When we spend hours sitting with hunched shoulders, tense necks, eyes fixed on artificial lights and without proper breaks, our body enters a state of chronic stress. Cortisol production increases, muscles contract, the digestive system slows down, and breathing becomes shallow. Maintained for days or months, this condition creates the perfect ground for anxiety, exhaustion, irritability, and depression. Neuroscience shows that the autonomic nervous system, especially the vagus nerve, which connects the brain and internal organs, is highly sensitive to digital lifestyle. When we live in constant alert, this system becomes dysregulated. We lose the ability to relax, to digest, to rest. We remain stuck in fight or flight mode even without any real threat, and the body, which should be a refuge, becomes a battlefield of tension, an invisible prison disguised as normality. Somatic psychology, a therapeutic approach that unites body and mind, teaches us that unprocessed emotions are stored physically. Sadness can become chest pain, anger, jaw tension, guilt, a knot in the stomach. And with excessive technology use, the dissociation between mind and body intensifies. We begin to exist in the virtual realm, while the body falls ill in the real one. That's why true emotional healing requires reconnection with the body. Cognitive behavioral therapy already incorporates simple body-based practices such as body scanning, conscious breathing, active breaks, and even light physical exercises during the day. These actions restore balance between thought and sensation, between focus and relaxation. Breathing, for example, is a direct bridge to the nervous system. Breathing deeply for just 2 minutes already alters brain activation patterns, reducing anxiety and restoring presence. In psychoanalysis, the body is also a symbolic field. It expresses what the mind represses. Recurring physical symptoms, unexplained tensions, chronic fatigue, These are often unconscious manifestations of unresolved internal conflicts. The body speaks, and in the digital age, it might be screaming, asking for pause, asking for touch, asking for rest. Spirituality invites us to see the body as a temple, as sacred space, as the home of consciousness. In many traditions, bodily care is part of spiritual care. Walking in silence, stretching at dawn, eating with gratitude, resting with awareness. These simple gestures restore our connection with the body, and with it comes emotional healing too. If you've been feeling strange pains, persistent fatigue, shortness of breath, insomnia, or a vague sense of always being switched on, maybe your body is asking for something deeper than a painkiller. Maybe it's asking for reconnection. Because you are not just mind, you are body, and the body also needs to breathe, to feel, to unplug. We live in a paradoxical era. We've never been so interconnected through networks, messages, images, calls, and comments, and at the same time, we've never felt so alone. It's the new loneliness, silent, disguised as constant interaction, yet deeply corrosive. A loneliness that isn't the absence of people, but the absence of true bonds. Because what fills us is not the number of likes, but the quality of affection. What soothes us is not digital presence, but the gaze that welcomes, the voice that listens, the body that is truly there. This new loneliness is born from superficial connections, from conversations that begin and end without soul, from interactions that generate dopamine, but not belonging. And the most dangerous part is that it becomes normalized. We learn to smile through filters, to hide pain with memes, to turn tears into stories. And little by little, we begin to distance ourselves from our vulnerability and from others, because to exist on social networks, we must appear strong, interesting, desirable. But to exist in depth, we must be real. Contemporary psychology warns about the effects of this disguised loneliness. Studies show that the feeling of social isolation is directly linked to an increase in depression, anxiety, insomnia, irritability, and even cardiovascular diseases. The absence of authentic bonds weakens our immune system, reduces our longevity, and undermines our ability to face adversity. True relationships are a source of both emotional and biological protection. Psychoanalysis understands loneliness as a symptom of our original helplessness. From birth, we seek the other as a mirror, as the container of our emotions. And when we don't find that other who listens, who validates, who holds us, the pain resurfaces. Even as adults, we remain children longing to be held. But in the digital age, we try to fulfill that with read messages, emojis, and notifications. But the soul knows. It knows when it is alone, even if surrounded by people. In cognitive behavioral therapy, loneliness is faced with concrete acts of reconnection. Joining support groups, rekindling old bonds, practicing active listening, offering help without expecting something in return, expressing real feelings instead of only sharing content. All of this helps to reactivate the sense of belonging, and most importantly, to cultivate relationships where we can be who we are, not who we think we should be. Spirituality, in turn, sees loneliness as an opportunity to return to what truly matters. It reminds us that being alone is not the same as being empty, that there is a difference between isolation and solitude, and that often, relational emptiness invites us to cultivate a deeper inner presence, to develop a friendship with ourselves, a dialogue with what is invisible yet real, a bond with what is eternal. If today you feel you have many contacts but few bonds, many followers but little intimacy, many messages but little listening, pause. Look inward. What are you trying to fill? What part of you is asking for connection? And what kind of presence have you been offering yourself? You deserve more than quick connections. You deserve true encounters. And those encounters begin when you choose to show up with truth. No one plans to become dependent. We don't wake up one day deciding to replace human touch with touchscreen taps. But little by little, almost without noticing, we get lost in this sea of stimuli. With every notification, a burst of dopamine. With every endless scroll, an escape from emptiness. With every new tab opened, an unconscious attempt to fill what's missing inside. Digital dependence isn't just about screen time. It's about what we're trying to numb. It's about how technology, instead of being a tool, becomes an emotional crutch. It's important to understand that digital addiction shares the same psychological components as any other addiction. There's immediate pleasure, easy reward, tolerance, the more we use, the more we need, and withdrawal, the distress we feel when disconnected. The phone becomes an extension of the body. The screen becomes a refuge, a distraction, a companion, an escape valve. And when we're away from it, we feel irritated, bored, anxious, uncomfortable, as if we can't breathe, as if reality is unbearable without that interface between us and the world. Behavioral psychology explains that tech addiction is fueled by intermittent reinforcement, meaning we never know exactly when the next notification, like, or message will arrive. This creates a constant state of anticipation, much like gambling. It's the addictive design of platforms, algorithms built to capture attention and hold it at any cost. And we, as users, are trapped between the illusion of control and the loss of it. We want to stop, but something stronger pulls us back in. Cognitive behavioral therapy offers practical strategies to break this cycle. These include setting specific times to use social media, turning off non-urgent notifications, using apps to monitor screen time, creating tech-free zones at home, like the bedroom or dining table, and replacing digital habits with activities that involve the body, nature, silence, or real presence. It's not about banning technology, but about reclaiming the power of choice, to use rather than be used. Psychoanalysis, on the other hand, explores what lies beneath the compulsion. What are we avoiding when we connect compulsively? What silences scare us? What memories are we trying to bury beneath short videos and fleeting likes? Often, digital addiction is just the visible face of a deeper void. Old emotional wounds, unresolved anxieties, an identity that needs a digital reflection to feel valid. Healing, then, isn't just about unplugging. It's about reconnecting with yourself. Spirituality invites us to see this scenario as a call to presence. Truly being present is one of the greatest challenges of the digital age, because presence requires surrender. It demands vulnerability. It means being with the other and with yourself, without distractions, without filters, without escape. And in that space of presence, something shifts. Anxiety dissolves, time slows down, and the soul breathes. What once was addiction becomes a choice. What was once compulsion becomes consciousness. If today you feel like you can't stop, like you need to just check quickly all the time, if you feel anxious without your phone nearby, if your relationships, sleep, or health are being affected, know this. This is not failure, this is a symptom. And every symptom is a cry for care, for attention, for change. You can live without it. And more than that, you can live better, lighter, more present, more whole. Because real life happens outside the screen. We live connected but not necessarily bonded. Amid so many contacts, likes, followers, and messages, what we truly seek, and so often fail to find, is authentic affection, a genuine presence, a hug that doesn't depend on Wi-Fi, a connection that goes beyond algorithms and notifications. The digital age, with all its speed and convenience, has brought us a new form of presence, but also of absence. Absence of depth, of permanence, of vulnerability. And that's why today, more than ever, creating real bonds has become an act of quiet revolution. Social media, though it fosters proximity, can also create an illusion of intimacy. A like is not a hug. An emoji doesn't replace eye contact. A seen message doesn't mean you've been truly heard. Many people find themselves surrounded by contacts, yet drowning in emotional loneliness. Because affection requires emotional presence. It takes time, active listening, reciprocity. And the culture of digital performance, where we display our best angle, our highlight reels, the most quotable captions, can drive away the very thing we long for most, genuine connection. Relational psychology teaches us that real bonds are built through imperfection. It's when we show what we truly feel, when we are honest about our struggles, that others can truly find us. The problem is, in an era of constant comparison, we fear we'll seem less interesting if we reveal our pain, our sadness, our doubts. But it's in exactly those moments that the deepest connections are born. When someone chooses to stay, even after seeing your darkness. Cognitive behavioral therapy encourages the intentional cultivation of support networks. This may include trusted friends, in-person groups, community gatherings, group therapy, or regular family meetings where active listening, not just information exchange, is prioritized. The challenge isn't quantity, it's quality. A single conversation a week with someone who truly listens is more healing than dozens of shallow messages a day. Nourishing relationships are those where you can simply breathe, not constantly explain yourself. In psychoanalysis, we learn that the desire for connection is born from the first maternal gaze. We want to be seen. We long to exist in the eyes of another. And when that gaze is missing, we search for digital mirrors, likes, reposts, comments, trying to recover that primal presence. But it never fills the void. The emotional emptiness from childhood isn't healed by virtual validation. It is through true encounters, with someone who sees us beyond our mask, that we rediscover our lost sense of belonging. Spirituality teaches us that every human being is, at their core, a being of connection. We are here to love, to serve, to share, to learn from one another. True bonds are bridges to something greater. When two souls connect with truth, the world shifts. Because listening heals, presence transforms. Love, when it's real, reorganizes everything inside. If you've been feeling the absence of affection, presence, or nourishing relationships, maybe it's time to look around with new eyes. And more than that, to become that space of listening yourself. Because sometimes the love we're searching for begins in how we treat others. A gesture, a silence that listens, a sincere message. Time offered without expecting anything in return. You can, and you deserve to, live surrounded by bonds that nourish. They are real, but they are born from the courage to be real too. In a world where everything screams, where screens flash, where the mind races and anxiety grows in fast-forward loops, there is a quiet space within us that longs to be heard. It's not the rational mind, it's not the tired body, it's the soul. And it doesn't speak in words, but in gut feelings, in emptiness, in nameless anguish, in a deep yearning for something we may have never even touched. The sacred. When the mind is overwhelmed, it is often a sign that the soul is undernourished, and that's when spirituality ceases to be a concept and becomes a necessity. Spirituality, in this sense, doesn't need to have a religious form. It can be a broader awareness, an inner space where we connect with something greater than our schedules, our obligations, our fears, and our devices. It is in this space that we rediscover peace, not as the absence of problems, but as the presence of meaning. Because the mind may be restless, but when the soul finds shelter, even chaos can grow quiet. And that shelter begins in silence. Transpersonal psychology sees the human being as an integration of levels: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. When we live only within the first three, we begin to fall ill, because there is a dimension within us that longs for transcendence, that seeks meaning, that needs purpose in order to go on. And the digital lifestyle centered around performance, comparison, and instant gratification often pulls us away from what is essential and traps us in the superficial. We start to exist through stimulus rather than through presence. Psychoanalysis understands the sacred as a symbolic need. Human beings need rituals, pauses, symbols that reconnect them to something beyond reason. Prayer, meditation, contemplation, mantras, chants, rituals, these aren't just habits, they are deep languages of the soul. And when we lose those symbolic spaces, emptiness takes shape. The soul begins to suffer. Depression sets in not only because of pain, but because of the lack of direction. Because a life without the sacred is a life without guidance. Cognitive behavioral therapy also recognizes spirituality as a source of resilience. People who engage in some form of spiritual practice, even if not tied to an institution, tend to have greater emotional stability, more effective coping skills during crises, and a deeper ability to find meaning in suffering. The feeling of connection to something greater builds an inner safety that doesn't rely on external circumstances. It's like a deep root in the middle of a storm. Science, more and more, is confirming the benefits of profound silence, the kind that goes beyond external noise. Studies show that regular moments of meditation, silent prayer, or contemplation of nature reduce cortisol levels, improve immune system function, increase empathy, and promote long-lasting states of well-being. And beyond all that, they reconnect us with something we often forget in the rush: our essence. If your mind is tired, if your thoughts are loud, if you've been feeling an invisible weight on your shoulders, maybe your soul is calling you. And the way back is not in one more video, one more tab, one more notification. It's in less, in pausing, in breathing, in listening. It's in the silence that heals, in the presence that reconnects, in the spirituality that is reborn in every moment of surrender. You don't have to understand everything now. You don't need to change everything at once. Just sit, breathe, close your eyes, and listen. Because what the soul longs for is not noise, it's comfort. And sometimes, silence is the most therapeutic sound of all. The change you seek in your mental health may not lie in a sudden breakthrough, but in small daily practices that slowly accumulate and gradually rebuild your presence, your focus, and your inner peace. In the digital age, where we are constantly pulled by endless stimuli, emotional well-being requires more than therapy, reflection, and knowledge. It requires ritual. Yes, simple and intentional rituals that restore your life's human rhythm, healing silence, and inner timing. Because healing often begins with organizing the invisible. Caring for your mind in a hyper-connected world demands clear boundaries, and those boundaries don't appear on their own. They must be set intentionally. Creating routines for digital well-being is like building emotional walls between what nourishes you and what drains you. It's remembering that screen time should serve life, not the other way around. And it starts with simple gestures: waking up without checking your phone, sleeping away from screens, reserving moments each day for real silence. Behavioral psychology teaches us that habits are built through repetition and reward. In other words, by repeating a healthy action often, the brain begins to associate it with well-being, turning it into part of your identity. That's why inserting small routines that create emotional relief and genuine connection, like starting the day with deep breathing, journaling for 5 minutes, walking without headphones, preparing a meal without distractions, or turning off Wi-Fi for an hour at night, might seem like little, but it changes everything. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, suggests creating a digital hygiene plan, similar to sleep hygiene. This includes turning off non-essential notifications, uninstalling anxiety-inducing apps, setting quiet hours where you disconnect to be present with yourself or someone you love, and tracking your screen time with self-compassion, not as punishment, but as a conscious choice. The goal isn't to be extreme, but to reclaim control over your mental time. Neuroscience confirms that these intentional pauses reduce stress levels, increase working memory, improve emotional regulation, and even boost creativity. The brain needs downtime to process emotions, consolidate learning, and regain balance. When we're always connected, there's no space to integrate. We become full of information, but empty of meaning. Simple rituals restore that space. They are like breaths for the mind. Spirituality teaches us that routine doesn't have to be a prison. When done with intention, it becomes sacred practice. A candle lit at dusk, a cup of tea before bed, a moment of silence before a meeting, all of it can be a gateway to presence. Routine stops being automatic and becomes a space of reconnection, a daily reminder that you are alive, that there is something within you worth caring for, that peace doesn't come after everything. It's found in the small choices you make now. You don't need to change the world today, nor do you need to disconnect from the digital world forever. You only need to start from this moment on, creating spaces of presence in your routine. Choose where to rest your gaze. Decide who you want to be fully present with. Give your body pauses, your mind rest, and your soul time. These quiet choices added together create a new reality, lighter, healthier, and more truly yours. The human mind was never meant to process 1,000 stimuli per minute. It wasn't designed to live in a state of continuous alert, jumping from notification to notification, from video to video, from thought to thought. Yet that's exactly what the digital world has imposed on us, a silent collapse of our emotional health. The name for this? Cognitive overload. A mental fatigue so invisible it accumulates until it becomes exhaustion, a kind of burnout that can't be healed with one more scroll, but only through a deep soul detox. Emotional detox isn't just about turning off your phone for a few hours. It's an intentional process of slowing down from within, of clearing the emotional residue left by toxic comparisons, aggressive content, information overload, and the absence of silence. With every story that sparks envy, every headline that triggers fear, every comment that wounds, something settles inside us. And over time, that emotional dust clouds our clarity, steals our lightness, and even dulls the joy of being alive. Psychoanalysis sees overstimulation as an unconscious attempt to avoid contact with what's real, with pain, with emptiness, with the questions we'd rather not face. But the paradox is, the more we run, the more we lose ourselves. So emotional detox isn't just about stepping away from screens, but about reconnecting with what lies behind them. It's about looking into the eyes of what hurts and beginning to heal from that place. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, proposes a technique called inverse exposure, which consists of confronting digital stress triggers with opposite actions. For example, if social media excess causes you anxiety, the prescription is to spend time in nature. If constant comparison affects you, the practice is to write a real gratitude list every day. If digital noise is making you sick, creating sacred moments of silence can bring restoration. It's not enough to avoid what's toxic. You must also nourish what's healthy. Neuroscience shows that after a period of hyperstimulation, the brain needs at least 72 hours of deceleration to begin regaining biochemical balance. This means a real detox doesn't happen with a click. It requires consistency. That's why it's so important to create daily micro-retreats. They can be 20 minutes without visual stimuli, an afternoon offline, a full day each week just to be, to breathe, to reconnect with life beyond the screen. It's in those conscious empty spaces that the mind begins to blossom again. And spirituality reminds us that silence is not absence, it's presence. It is through emotional detox that we return to what matters: the sound of the wind, the voice of someone we love, the intuition we lost in the noise, the longing for ourselves. Detoxing the soul is about remembering what makes us human. It's about clearing the filters, removing the masks, pausing the algorithms, and diving into what is real, imperfect, alive. If you feel like you've been carrying burdens that aren't yours, if your emotions are jumbled, your mind restless, and your heart tired, maybe it's not weakness. Maybe it's too much. And the antidote to too much is emptiness, the space where healing enters and where, gently, life begins again. We've reached the moment to close this long journey with a gesture of comfort, depth, and rebirth. After so many reflections, insights, deep dives, and silences, it's time to return inward with lightness. Because everything shared up to this point only becomes healing when it finds within you a fertile space to bloom. And that space is called presence, awareness, self-love. Nothing you heard here was by accident. Every word was shaped so that now you can see yourself more clearly, listen to yourself more gently, and allow yourself to live more fully. The digital mind, trained to rush, needs pauses, and the soul, silenced for too long, needs a voice. So before we close, let's breathe together. Close your eyes for a few seconds. Drop your shoulders. Feel your body. Allow yourself to exist without doing anything. Because it's only when we truly pause that we can hear what's been waiting to be heard, our deepest truth. And the truth is, you are not alone. You never were. There's a quiet strength inside you that's withstood it all, and it's still here, alive. This is the time to plant some seeds in your mind and heart. Seeds that, if tended with intention, can grow into new paths. Together now, let's affirm with courage and presence: I allow myself to rest. I am greater than digital pressure. I can unplug without disconnecting from myself. I recognize my worth beyond appearances. I am not what I consume. I am what I choose to feel. I am worthy of real affection, full presence, and inner peace. I don't have to be available to the world all the time. I choose myself. I return to myself. I begin again from within. These phrases are not magic, but they are maps. And when spoken with presence, day after day, they can redraw the inner landscape. Therapy doesn't end here. It becomes practice, becomes habit, becomes a daily reconnection to whatever grounds you, soothes you, and brings you back to center. Spirituality reminds us that every ending is also a portal, and perhaps this is yours. The moment to begin again, not by changing everything around you, but by shifting from within, rebuilding step by step a new relationship with life, with time, with silence, with the sacred, with others, and above all, with yourself. May you remember every day that your mind deserves peace, your body deserves rest, and your soul, freedom. May you treat yourself as someone precious, because you are. And as you heal, may you become a safe haven for others too. This is the power of presence. This is the path of reconnection. This is the beginning of your inner rebirth. Welcome back.